The scent of death lingered in the ancient stone halls of Castle Blackthorn, not the fresh copper tang of battlefield wounds that Marcus Blackthorn had known so well in his youth, but the slow, insidious decay that had become his constant companion, his own scent. The mighty Alpha King of the Silver Crescent Pack stood at the towering windows of his private chambers, watching the blood-red sunset paint the mountains in fire. 45 years of life had carved his face into something that could have been chiseled from the very mountains themselves. Deep lines framed eyes that had once blazed with golden alpha fire, now dimmed to a dull amber. His broad shoulders, still powerful despite his illness, were draped with the ceremonial fur cloak that felt heavier with each passing day. The shadow plague, they called it. A mysterious illness that had crept through his veins for months now, silencing his wolf, weakening his limbs, and stealing his vitality, one heartbeat at a time. The finest healers in the 7 territories had been summoned. Ancient texts had been consulted. Shamans had performed rituals that hadn't been seen in centuries. Nothing had worked. His wolf, once a magnificent silver beast that could bring rival alphas to their knees with a single growl, now lay dormant within him, a slumbering shadow that no longer answered his call. Outside his windows, the sprawling territory of the Silver Crescent Pack stretched toward the horizon. Once the most feared and respected werewolf pack in the Northern Territories, their influence had waned with their alpha's strength. Border skirmishes with rival packs had increased. Resources were contested. The pack's confidence in their leadership had begun to falter. Marcus could feel it all through the pack bonds that still remained, though they grew thinner with each passing moon. A knock at his chamber door interrupted his dark contemplation. "Enter," he commanded, his voice still carrying the weight of authority despite the illness that ravaged him. The massive oak doors swung open to reveal Thaddeus Ironwood, the 70-year-old head of the Pack Council. His silver-white hair was pulled back in a severe knot, his weathered face set in its permanent expression of disapproval. Behind him stood Victoria Ravenwing, the raven-haired beauty who served as the king's advisor, though her counsel had grown increasingly unwelcome as Marcus suspected her true allegiances lay with the council rather than the crown. "The preparations are complete, Your Majesty," Thaddeus announced, his deep voice echoing in the stone chamber. "The Callister girl will arrive tomorrow for the ceremony." Marcus turned fully from the window, fixing his advisor with a hard stare. "And her father has agreed to these terms?" A flicker of something, was it amusement, crossed Thaddeus's face before vanishing beneath his mask of deference. "Lord Callister had little choice in the matter. His family's standing depends entirely on our goodwill, as you well know." Marcus did know. The Callisters had once been among the most revered families in the Pack, their lineage as ancient as the Blackthorns themselves, but a series of political missteps and failed alliances had reduced them to little more than glorified servants of the crown, and now their final asset, the daughter of the house, would be sacrificed to a dying king for one last attempt to stabilize a faltering reign. "She is young," Marcus said, a statement rather than a question. The council had chosen her specifically for this attribute. Youth meant vitality, something the king desperately lacked. 18, Victoria confirmed, stepping forward. The candlelight caught the sharp planes of her face, casting shadows that made her appear almost predatory. "And untouched, as tradition demands, though she is," Victoria hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "unusual for one of her lineage." "Speak plainly, Victoria," Marcus growled, his patience wearing thin. "She is wolfless," Thaddeus interjected. "A true Omega, in the old sense of the word. No wolf spirit resides within her. Some consider it a mark of shame upon the Callister line. Others whisper of ancient prophecies. Either way, she is the last female of her bloodline, and the council believes this union is necessary for the good of the Pack." Wolfless. Marcus had heard of such beings, but had never encountered one. In the hierarchy of werewolf society, alphas stood at the top, those with the strongest wolf spirits, natural leaders whose mere presence could command submission. Betas formed the backbone of any pack, loyal and steady. Omegas traditionally stood at the bottom, the peacekeepers and nurturers. But a wolfless Omega was something else entirely. A human born to werewolf parents, but lacking the spiritual connection to shift forms. They were rare, often hidden away by ashamed families, their existence considered a genetic weakness. "And you believe this girl, this wolfless Omega, can somehow save me?" Marcus didn't bother hiding the skepticism in his voice. "Or is this merely political theater to distract the pack while you prepare for my successor?" Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but Thaddeus maintained his impassive expression. "The ancient texts speak of unique properties in the Callister bloodline. Their family has produced wolfless Omegas for generations, yet they were once the most powerful healers in our history. The marriage bond might create a channel through which her life force could supplement yours. Or it might do nothing at all except bind an innocent girl to a dying man," Marcus countered. "Your concern for the girl is admirable, Your Majesty," Thaddeus said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "But the needs of the pack must come before individual comfort. The ceremony will proceed as planned. The council has voted unanimously." Of course they had. The council that had once served the crown now sought to rule from behind it. As Marcus's strength had faded, their power had grown. They claimed to act in the pack's best interest, but Marcus suspected their motivations were far more self-serving. "Leave me," he ordered, turning back to the window. The sun had dipped below the mountains now, darkness creeping across the valley like the shadow that crept through his veins. "I wish to prepare for tomorrow in solitude." The soft rustle of clothing and the click of the heavy door signaled their departure, but not before Victoria added a final, pointed comment. "Remember, Your Majesty, this is as much for her benefit as yours. The Callister girl gains a crown, even if only briefly. Her sacrifice ensures her father's continued comfort and the restoration of some small measure of her family's dignity." When the door finally closed, Marcus allowed his shoulders to slump, the weight of his illness bearing down upon him more heavily in private. Tomorrow he would marry a stranger, a young woman forced into a union with a dying king. The absurdity of it might have made him laugh if the situation weren't so tragic. His wolf, though silent, stirred faintly within him at the thought of the coming ceremony. It was the strongest reaction he had felt from his inner beast in weeks. Curious, he thought, perhaps there was something to the council's plan after all. Or perhaps it was merely the ancient instinct of an alpha responding to the prospect of claiming a mate, even under such dire circumstances. Either way, tomorrow would bring Alara Callister to Castle Blackthorn. And with her, perhaps, the beginning of the end. The Callister estate stood in stark contrast to the grandeur of Castle Blackthorn. Once a proud manor that had housed generations of the esteemed lineage, it now bore the unmistakable signs of decline. The stone walls were weathered beyond character into disrepair, the gardens overgrown, the few remaining servants moving about with the quiet resignation of those who serve a falling house. Inside the master bedchamber, Lord Edmund Callister, once a respected pack elder, now lay propped against pillows, his once powerful frame wasted by age and grief, his breathing labored as he watched his daughter prepare for her wedding day. "You can still refuse, Alara," he wheezed, reaching for his daughter's hand with fingers that trembled with weakness. "I would not see you sacrificed for my mistakes." Alara Callister knelt beside her father's bed, her slender fingers closing around his. At 18, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed almost ethereal, pale skin that had never felt the wild rush of transformation, raven-black hair that fell in waves to her waist, and eyes of such a deep violet they appeared almost black in certain light. The physical manifestation of her wolfless state was subtle but unmistakable to those of their kind, a certain stillness where others of their species carried the constant restless energy of their dual nature. "There is nothing to refuse, Father," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "The council has made its decision. If I do not comply, they will strip you of what little status remains to our name. You would be removed from the pack entirely." The unspoken truth hung between them. A lone wolf, especially one as weak as her father, would not survive long in the wilderness beyond pack territory. It would be a death sentence. To be the bride of a dying alpha. Lord Callister shook his head weakly. To tie yourself to King Marcus in his final days. It is too much to ask of anyone, let alone my only child. Alara rose gracefully, moving to the window where her wedding dress had been laid out, a creation of silver silk and ancient lace that had been worn by Callister brides for generations. She ran her fingers over the delicate fabric, her expression unreadable. The council claims there is a chance the union might help him, that something in our bloodline might strengthen him. Her father's bitter laugh dissolved into a racking cough. When he had recovered enough to speak, his voice was harsh with anger and regret. They speak of legends and half-remembered prophecies. They seek to use you, as they have used all of us. The Blackthorn King may be a good man at heart. He was once, at least. But he is as much their puppet as we are now. Alara turned back to her father, her violet eyes shining with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. Then let me do this one thing for our family. If there is even the slightest chance that this union might restore some honor to the Callister name, I must take it. And if not, she hesitated, at least I will have secured your position and comfort for whatever time remains to you. The old man's eyes filled with tears, less restrained than his daughter's. My brave girl, he whispered, you have always been stronger than any wolf-blessed member of our line, even without the shift. Your mother would be proud. At the mention of her mother, Alara's composure nearly broke. Lady Callister had died when Alara was just 12, defending her wolfless daughter from the cruelty of pack children who had seen her difference as weakness. Her mother, a fierce beta with the heart of an alpha, had never once looked at Alara with disappointment, even as other pack members whispered that the wolfless child was a sign of the Callister line's deterioration. A knock at the chamber door interrupted the moment. The family's last remaining lady's maid, an older woman who had served the Callisters since before Alara's birth, entered with a reverence that belied their fallen status. The council's escort has arrived, my lady. It is time to prepare you for the journey to Castle Blackthorn. Lord Callister's grip on his daughter's hand tightened briefly. Remember who you are, Alara. You are a Callister. Wolfless or not, our blood runs ancient and true in your veins. Whatever happens at Castle Blackthorn, carry yourself with the dignity of our ancestors. Alara nodded, pressing a kiss to her father's forehead before straightening her spine and turning to face her fate. I am a Callister, she affirmed quietly, and I go to this union willingly for the good of our family and the pack. Hours later, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, Alara sat in the council's ornate carriage as it wound its way up the mountain path to Castle Blackthorn. The fortress loomed above her, its stone towers seeming to pierce the very sky. Built centuries ago by the first Blackthorn Alpha, it stood as a testament to the pack's power and permanence. Even in decline, the sight of it stirred something deep within Alara's human heart, a sense of awe mingled with trepidation. The carriage passed through massive iron gates and into a courtyard filled with pack members who had gathered to witness the arrival of their king's bride. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to poorly disguised pity to outright disdain. Alara heard the whispers as she descended from the carriage, assisted by the stone-faced guard who had accompanied her from her father's estate. The wolfless Omega, a hollow bride for a dying king. The last gasp of the Callister line. Can you imagine being tied to a mate you cannot feel through pack bonds? Alara kept her gaze forward, her back straight, her steps measured as she was escorted through the crowd and into the great hall of Castle Blackthorn. The interior was cavernous, with soaring ceilings supported by ancient timbers, walls adorned with the pelts of legendary beasts hunted by Blackthorn alphas, and a stone floor worn smooth by centuries of pack gatherings. At the far end stood a massive throne carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surface gleaming in the light from dozens of torch brackets. The throne, however, was empty. Instead, The king awaited her in the center of the hall, standing before the ancient stone altar where pack ceremonies had been conducted since time immemorial. Alara's first glimpse of Marcus Blackthorn sent an unexpected shock through her system. Despite his illness, the Alpha King remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his silver-streaked dark hair falling to his shoulders, his beard neatly trimmed to accentuate a jaw that could have been carved from granite. He wore the ceremonial garb of the Silver Crescent Alpha, black leather and silver mail beneath a cloak of midnight fur lined with silver thread. It was his eyes that betrayed his condition, amber irises that should have blazed with alpha fire, now dimmed to a dull glow, shadowed by dark circles that spoke of pain and sleepless nights. Yet despite this, he stood unaided, his posture unbowed by the illness that consumed him from within. As Alara approached, a hush fell over the assembled pack members. The council members stood to one side of the altar, Thaddeus Ironwood at their center, his aged face impassive as he watched the bride approach her groom. Victoria Ravenwing stood slightly apart from the others, her calculating gaze moving between the king and his bride-to-be. When Alara reached the altar, she sank into a deep curtsy before her king, her silver wedding gown pooling around her like moonlight on water. "Your Majesty," she murmured, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Rise, Alara Callister," Marcus commanded, his voice deeper and stronger than she had expected. When she straightened, she found his amber eyes studying her with an intensity that seemed to peer into her very soul. "You come to this union willingly?" he asked, pitched low enough that only she could hear. The question surprised her. The council had made it clear that her consent was assumed, not required. That the Alpha King would seek it explicitly spoke of a consideration she had not anticipated. "I do, Your Majesty," she answered truthfully, "for my father, for my family's honor, and for the pack." Something flickered in the king's eyes, respect perhaps, or recognition of the sacrifice her words represented. He nodded once, then extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Alara placed her much smaller hand in his. His skin burned hot against hers, the fever of his illness evident in his touch. The pack's eldest shaman stepped forward then, a withered crone whose clouded eyes suggested blindness, though she moved with the confidence of one who saw beyond physical limitations. "We gather beneath the watching moon," she intoned, her voice carrying surprising strength, "to bind the blood of Blackthorn and Callister, to unite Alpha and Omega, to strengthen what has weakened, and to fulfill what was prophesied." Alara felt a ripple move through the assembled pack at these words. Prophecy was rarely invoked in modern pack ceremonies. She darted a glance at Marcus and found his jaw tight, his expression suggesting this deviation from traditional vows had not been his choice. The shaman continued, lifting gnarled hands toward the vaulted ceiling where an opening had been constructed to allow the light of the moon to shine directly upon the altar during ceremonies. Though it was still daylight, the symbolism remained powerful. From the first shift, when our ancestors first heard the call of the moon and answered with fang and claw, we have known that true power comes from the joining of opposites, the sun and moon, the earth and sky, the Alpha and the Omega. She turned her milky eyes toward Alara. "Alara of House Callister, wolfless daughter of an ancient line, do you come to this union with open heart and willing spirit? Do you offer your essence, your loyalty, and your life's blood to bind with the Alpha King of the Silver Crescent Pack?" Alara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 100 gazes upon her. "I do," she affirmed, her voice clear and unwavering. The shaman nodded, turning her attention to Marcus. "Marcus of House Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Silver Crescent Pack, do you accept this Omega into your protection? Do you offer your strength, your territory, and your blood to bind with hers until the last moon falls?" Marcus's grip on Alara's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "I do," he answered, the two words rumbling from his chest like distant thunder. "Then let the ancient rites be observed," the shaman declared, producing an ornate silver dagger from the folds of her robes. Let blood meet blood, and let the moon bear witness to what is forged this day. In traditional pack marriages, the alpha would mark his mate with a bite to the throat, a display of dominance and protection combined, forging a bond through both blood and the mystical connection of their wolf spirits. But Alara had no wolf to answer such a call, and Marcus's wolf lay dormant within him. Instead, the blood ritual would serve as a symbolic alternative. The shaman took Alara's free hand, turning her palm upward. "First the Omega, who gives life," she murmured, drawing the blade across Alara's palm in one swift motion. Alara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from wincing as blood welled from the cut, bright crimson against her pale skin. The scent of it filled the hall immediately, and she was acutely aware of the dozens of werewolves whose senses would be heightened to its presence. The shaman then took Marcus's free hand. "Then the Alpha, who gives strength," she intoned, cutting across his palm with equal precision. His blood emerged darker than Alara's, almost black in the torchlight, and carried the unmistakable scent of illness, bitter and wrong to even Alara's human senses. A murmur rippled through the gathered pack, quickly silenced by a sharp look from Thaddeus. "Join your hands," the shaman commanded, "and let your blood mingle as your lives now mingle. Let the ancient magic that flows through both your lines recognize its counterpart." Marcus turned to face Alara fully, his amber eyes meeting her violet ones with an unspoken question. She gave a slight nod, and they raised their bleeding palms toward each other. The hall grew so silent that Alara could hear the distant cry of a hawk circling above the castle. This was it, the moment her fate would be sealed to this dying king. Whatever came after, there would be no turning back from this binding. Their palms met, blood to blood, and Alara gasped as an unexpected jolt of sensation shot up her arm. It wasn't pain, precisely, but a rush of heat so intense it bordered on it. Marcus's hand clamped down on hers with sudden force, his eyes widening in what appeared to be shock. For a breathless moment, nothing else happened. Then, like a lightning strike finding its mark, something elemental awakened between them. A visible shudder ran through Marcus's powerful frame, his back arching slightly as his free hand clutched at his chest. Alara felt a strange pulling sensation, as though something essential was being drawn from her very core. The hall began to spin around her, the faces of the watching pack members blurring into a smear of color and shadow. What happened next would be recounted in pack stories for generations to come. Marcus Blackthorn, the dying alpha, whose wolf had been silent for months, threw his head back and released a roar that shook the very foundations of Castle Blackthorn. It was not a human sound, but the primal call of an alpha wolf reclaiming its territory, powerful, ancient, and terrifying in its intensity. The assembled pack members instinctively dropped to their knees, necks bared in involuntary submission to the display of dominance. The dull amber of the king's eyes blazed suddenly with molten gold fire, the unmistakable mark of an alpha in his prime. His entire body seemed to swell with renewed vitality, the aura of power that had dimmed during his illness now radiating from him in palpable waves. And most shocking of all, beneath his skin, the shadowy outline of his wolf could be seen stirring, muscle and sinew shifting as the beast within him awakened from its long slumber. Alara swayed on her feet, suddenly lightheaded, her vision tunneling as the strange, draining sensation intensified. Her knees buckled, and she would have collapsed had Marcus not caught her with his free arm, pulling her against his chest in a gesture that seemed as much protective as it was instinctive. Their joined hands remained locked together, blood still mingling between their palms as the inexplicable transfer of energy continued. Through the fog that was rapidly descending over her consciousness, Alara was aware of chaos erupting in the hall. Council members were on their feet, shouting over one another. The shaman had fallen to her knees, her clouded eyes wide with what looked like fear. And Thaddeus Ironwood's face had transformed from impassive to something approaching horror as he stared at the transformed king. "This is not possible," Alara heard Victoria Ravenwing exclaim, her voice cutting through the din. "The shadow plague cannot be reversed. The ancient texts were explicit." The last thing Alara registered before darkness claimed her was the rumble of Marcus's voice, deeper and stronger than before, resonating through the chest she was pressed against. "Take her to the royal chambers and clear the hall, now!" When consciousness returned to Alara, it came slowly, like wading through deep water toward a distant surface. Her body felt strangely hollow, as though something vital had been scooped from within her. She became aware of soft furs beneath her, the scent of pine and wood smoke in the air, and the sound of low voices nearby, pitched for privacy, but clear enough to her returning senses. "The bond should not have formed this way," a female voice was saying. Victoria Ravenwing, Alara recognized. "A wolfless Omega cannot create a true mating bond with an Alpha. It defies everything we know about our kind. Yet it has happened nonetheless." This voice, rich and resonant with newfound strength, could only belong to Marcus. "My wolf is awake for the first time in months. The Shadow Plague's grip has loosened." "At what cost?" A third voice, older, gravelly with age. The shaman, Alara realized. "Look at the girl. The ceremony has drained her nearly dry. This is not a sustainable solution, Your Majesty." "She is my mate now," Marcus replied, a hint of a growl entering his tone. "Bound by blood, and by whatever ancient magic flows between our lines. I will not allow her to be harmed." "The Council will want answers," Victoria warned. "Thaddeus was disturbed by what transpired." "I imagine he was," Marcus said, dry humor evident in his voice. "His carefully orchestrated political theater has transformed into something far beyond his control. Tell me, Victoria, did the Council truly believe this union would fail to affect my condition? Or did they hope to accelerate my decline by binding me to a wolfless mate?" A heavy silence followed this accusation, broken only when Alara could not suppress a small moan as she attempted to move. Instantly the conversation ceased, and she felt the mattress dip as someone sat beside her. A warm hand, Marcus's, brushed her hair back from her forehead. "She wakes," he said, his voice gentler now. "Leave us, both of you. I would speak with my queen alone when she is fully conscious." Alara heard the rustle of clothing and the soft click of the chamber door closing before she managed to force her heavy eyelids open. The room swam into focus slowly, a vast bedchamber dominated by an enormous four-poster bed draped with furs and silks in the silver crescent colors of midnight blue and silver. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with ancient weapons and tapestries depicting the legendary deeds of Blackthorn Alpha's past. And sitting beside her, watching her with eyes that now blazed with healthy alpha fire, was Marcus Blackthorn, looking decades younger than he had at the altar mere hours before. The sallow cast had left his skin, the lines of pain around his eyes had softened, and he radiated the vital energy that was the birthright of all alphas, particularly those of royal blood. "Welcome back, little queen," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. "You had us concerned." Alara tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced her back against the pillows. "What happened?" she managed, her throat dry as parchment. Marcus reached for a silver goblet on the bedside table, supporting her head gently as he held it to her lips. Cool water soothed her parched throat, and she drank gratefully before he set the goblet aside. "Something unexpected," he answered, studying her face with an intensity that might have unnerved her had she not been so disoriented. "The blood ritual awakened my wolf and reversed the effects of the Shadow Plague, at least temporarily." "How is that possible?" Alara asked, remembering the strange pulling sensation, the feeling of something being drawn from her very essence. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, and she sensed it was not a confession he made often. "The shaman speaks of ancient magics, of prophecies concerning the union of a true alpha and a wolfless omega from the Callister line. Victoria babbles about impossible bond formations. The council members whisper of witchcraft and manipulation, and his mouth curved in a wry smile. I find I care little for their theories. The reality is that I can feel my wolf again, strong and vital within me for the first time in months, and it appears to have come at your expense." Alara considered this, taking stock of her body's weakened state. "I feel empty," she said finally, "as though something has been taken from me." A shadow of concern crossed his face. "The shaman believes the blood ritual created a channel between us, that my wolf is drawing strength from your life force to combat the shadow plague. It was not the outcome the council anticipated when they arranged this union." "Was it not?" Alara asked, a hint of bitterness entering her tone. "They sought to bind me to a dying king. Perhaps they calculated exactly what would happen, that I would sacrifice my strength to extend your life just long enough for them to consolidate their power." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, reassessing the young woman before him. "You have a shrewd mind for politics, Alara Callister." "Blackthorn now," she corrected quietly, "and I have had ample opportunity to observe the machinations of those in power, from the less enviable position of those without it." Something like respect flickered in his golden eyes. "Blackthorn, yes. My queen in name and now, it seems, in essence as well." He paused, studying her with renewed intensity. "The question that concerns me most immediately is whether this life force transfer is temporary or permanent, whether it will kill you to keep me alive." The blunt assessment of their situation should have terrified her, but Alara found herself strangely calm. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion, or perhaps it was the realization that her fate had been sealed the moment her blood mingled with his. "If it is permanent," she said slowly, "then I have fulfilled my purpose in this union. My sacrifice ensures my father's position and restores some measure of honor to the Callister name." Marcus's expression hardened. "I did not take you as my mate to watch you wither away for my benefit. If that is the price of my restored strength, then I reject it." "You may not have a choice," Alara pointed out. "The bond is formed. Whatever ancient magic flows between us cannot simply be undone because you find it distasteful." "I am the Alpha King," he growled, the gold in his eyes flaring brighter. "I make the choices for my pack and my mate, and I choose not to drain the life from a bride who came to me in good faith." His vehemence surprised her. This was not the calculating political marriage she had been prepared for, nor the deathbed union the council had orchestrated. This was something else entirely, a complication no one had anticipated. "Then what do you propose?" she asked. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside the royal chambers. Raised voices, the sound of hurried footsteps, and then a pounding on the heavy oak door. "Your Majesty!" a voice called urgently. "The council demands an immediate audience. There are reports of rogues at the northern border. 3 pack members have been attacked." Marcus rose to his full, imposing height, his expression transforming from concerned mate to warrior king in an instant. "We will continue this discussion when I return," he told Alara, his tone brooking no argument. "Rest. Regain your strength. There are guards posted outside the door who will attend to any needs you may have." He strode to a massive wardrobe and withdrew a sword in a worn leather scabbard, a warrior's weapon, not a ceremonial one. Buckling it around his waist, he moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Whatever has happened between us, Alara Blackthorn, know this. You are now under my protection, not as a political pawn or a sacrifice, but as my queen. I may not have chosen this union, but I will honor it." With that declaration hanging in the air, he pulled open the door and was gone, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts and the unsettling knowledge that their fates were now bound together by blood and ancient magic that neither of them fully understood. In the shadowed council chamber deep within Castle Blackthorn, the air crackled with tension. Marcus stood before the assembled council members, his restored vitality evident in his stance, feet planted firmly, shoulders squared, head held high. The shadow plague that had bent his powerful frame was now held at bay, though for how long none could say. Thaddeus Ironwood sat at the head of the ancient oak table, his weathered face carved into a mask of concern that did not quite reach his calculating eyes. "3 dead, Your Majesty," he was saying, his deep voice echoing in the stone chamber. "All at the northern boundary, all with their throats torn out in a manner consistent with rogue werewolves." "Rogues have not breached our borders in a decade," Marcus replied, his enhanced senses detecting the subtle shifts in scent and posture among the council members as they reacted to his restored dominance. "Why now, when our pack should appear at its most vulnerable?" Victoria Ravenwing, standing near the map table where the territories of the Silver Crescent Pack were laid out in meticulous detail, offered her assessment. "Perhaps word of your illness has spread farther than we realized. Rival packs may be testing our resolve, our ability to defend our territory with an alpha in decline." "Yet I am not in decline any longer, am I?" Marcus pinned her with a golden stare that made her drop her gaze instinctively, a fact which seems to have disturbed the council more than it has relieved them. Murmurs of protest rose from around the table, but Thaddeus silenced them with a raised hand. "The restoration of your strength is, of course, a blessing for the pack," he said smoothly. "But the manner of it raises serious concerns. The bond you have formed with the Callister girl is unprecedented and potentially dangerous." "Dangerous to whom?" Marcus challenged, stalking closer to the elder wolf. Even at 70, Thaddeus was a formidable presence, but next to the fully empowered Alpha King, he seemed suddenly diminished. "To my mate, certainly, whose life force appears to be strengthening mine. But that is my concern to address, not the council's." "With respect, Your Majesty," another council member ventured, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, "the well-being of the royal couple is very much the council's concern, particularly when ancient magic is involved. We have consulted the archives. There is mention of a prophecy concerning the Callister line and a hollow vessel that might contain the shadow." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You did not see fit to share this information before the ceremony?" "It was deemed speculative at best," Thaddeus interjected. "Many ancient texts speak of the unique properties of wolfless omegas, particularly those from the Callister bloodline. Few have proven to have any basis in reality." "And yet here we stand," Marcus growled, "with my wolf awakened and my strength restored through a bond with precisely such an omega. Coincidence, Thaddeus? Or calculation?" The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Victoria moved subtly away from the map table, positioning herself closer to the door, a movement not lost on Marcus's heightened senses. "Whatever the council's intentions," she said carefully, "what matters now is understanding what has happened and how to proceed. The girl is weakened but stable. The bond appears to be transferring life force from her to you. The question is whether this transfer is sustainable or whether it will ultimately drain her completely. And whether it will fully cure the shadow plague or merely delay its progression," added Thaddeus, stroking his silver beard thoughtfully. "We must consider the possibility that this is a temporary reprieve rather than a permanent solution." Marcus studied the council members one by one, noting their reactions, their sense, the subtle tells of their bodies that might reveal their true thoughts. Something about this situation felt wrong, had felt wrong from the moment the council had proposed the union. Why this particular girl? Why now? And what did they know of the shadow plague that they weren't sharing? "The rogues at the border take precedence," he said finally, decisive action being the alpha way. "I will lead a patrol to the northern boundary myself. It has been too long since the pack saw their alpha in his full strength." "Is that wise, Your Majesty?" Thaddeus questioned, his tone suggesting concern, while his scent betrayed something closer to alarm. "So soon after the ceremony? We don't know how separation might affect the bond with your new queen." "A valid concern," Marcus acknowledged, though he suspected the elder wolf's motivations had little to do with Alara's well-being. "Which is why you, Thaddeus, will personally ensure her comfort and safety in my absence. Consider it your highest priority." It was a strategic move, keeping the head of the council close to the castle, where his actions could be monitored, while Marcus assessed the situation firsthand. The old wolf's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he inclined his head in acquiescence. "As you command, Your Majesty." "I will accompany you to the border," Victoria offered, a little too quickly. "My knowledge of the Northern Territories might prove useful." "Your place is here," Marcus countered, "assisting Thaddeus in caring for my mate and researching the nature of this bond. I want answers when I return, not theories." He turned to the youngest member of the council, a wolf barely into his 4th decade, who had always seemed the least entangled in the political machinations of his elders. "Darius will accompany me, along with my personal guard." Relief mingled with apprehension in the younger wolf's scent as he stood and bowed. "It would be an honor, Your Majesty." "Then it's settled," Marcus declared, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "I leave within the hour. Thaddeus, I expect regular reports on my mate's condition. Victoria, continue your research into the archives. If there is more to this prophecy than speculative nonsense, I want to know of it." As the council members rose and began to disperse, Marcus caught Thaddeus by the arm, pulling him close enough to speak privately. "One more thing, old friend," he said, the last 2 words carrying a weight of irony. "Should any harm come to my mate in my absence, should she weaken further or experience any distress whatsoever, I will hold you personally responsible, and my wolf, now fully awakened, will respond accordingly. Am I understood?" Thaddeus met his gaze evenly, though the scent of fear seeped from him like poison. "Perfectly, Your Majesty. The Queen will be protected as if she were my own daughter." Marcus released him with a curt nod, turning his attention to the preparations for the border patrol. His wolf prowled within him, restless and alert after its long dormancy, senses heightened to detect the currents of deceit and danger that swirled through Castle Blackthorn. Something was very wrong within his kingdom, had been wrong long before the shadow plague had weakened him, and somehow the key to understanding it all lay with the pale, violet-eyed girl who now bore his mark and shared his life force. His mate, his queen, his unexpected salvation. But as he strode through the castle corridors, issuing commands and feeling the rush of alpha power surging through his veins once more, a shadow of doubt crept into his thoughts. The bond had formed too easily, too powerfully. The council had been too prepared with their obscure prophecies and ancient texts, and the rogues at the border, their timing was too convenient, drawing him away from the castle just as he had reclaimed his strength. It felt like the first move in a game whose rules and stakes he did not yet understand. But Marcus Blackthorn had not become Alpha King by being easily outmaneuvered. Whatever scheme was unfolding around him and his new mate, he would uncover it. And those responsible would learn why, even in his weakened state, the packs of the Northern Territories still whispered his name with fear and respect. The game had begun, and with his wolf awake and his strength returning, Marcus intended to win.
Retry KA Việt tiếp Part 2, theo dàn ý với độ dài minimum 60.000 words, maximum 7.000 words, không sử dụng dấu gạch ngang giữa các Chapter 1. 2. Orchestrated Vietnamese fantasy narrative structure with character arcs and plot twists. 15s. Let me review the outline for Part 2 from the previous exchange before I start writing. Based on the outline provided, Part 2, N.A. Shang Bi Mật Cổ Xưa, Ancient Secrets, should include Chương Phỏn, Linh hồn ràng buộc. Marcus khôi phục sức khỏe nhưng phát hiện Elara đang suy yếu dần. Giới thiệu Samuel Oakenshield, cựu quân sư 65 tuổi, bạn chiến đấu xưa của Marcus, người duy nhất trung thành tuyệt đối. Twist 3. Samuel tiết lộ rằng hội đồng đã thực hiện nghi lễ cổ để làm suy yếu Marcus và Elara chính là chìa khóa, không ngờ đảo ngược nghi lễ đó. Chương 5. Lời nguyện dòng máu. Marcus và Samuel tìm kiếm trong thư viện cổ, phát hiện lời tiên tri về sự kết hợp giữa Alpha và Omega không sói. Elara bắt đầu nhìn thấy những bóng đen quanh thành viên hội đồng. Twist 4. Marcus phát hiện gia tộc Callister có quan hệ huyết thống với thợ săn bóng đêm cổ xưa, những chiến binh con người chuyên tiêu diệt người sói hàng trăm năm trước. Chương 6. Những đồng minh bất ngờ. Giới thiệu Catherine Kate Silverbane, 40 tuổi, thủ lĩnh nữ bộ lạc láng giềng, từng là người tình xưa của Marcus. Elara vô tình phát hiện khả năng điều khiển ánh sáng và bóng tối khi bảo vệ một đứa trẻ khỏi cuộc tấn công. Marcus, Samuel và Kate hình thành liên minh để chống lại âm mưu thực sự của hội đồng. I'll need to pick up where Part 1 left off, with Marcus heading to the northern border to investigate the rogue wolves while leaving Alara at the castle under Thaddeus' supervision. I should develop the bond between Marcus and Alara, introduce Samuel Oakenshield as a key ally, reveal the Council's betrayal, explore Alara's emerging powers, and build toward the formation of the alliance against the true threat. I'll aim for the cinematic prose style with emotional intensity and rhythmic pacing as requested. I'll keep dialogue limited but impactful, and focus on visual storytelling to maintain high viewer retention for the target audience of males over 60 living in the U.S. Alpha's Redemption. The Northern Territories stretched before Marcus Blackthorne like a vast, untamed canvas, painted in shades of twilight and forest. 3 days had passed since he had left Castle Blackthorne, 3 days of tracking elusive scents and following trails that seemed to materialize and vanish with suspicious convenience. The rogues who had reportedly killed his pack members remained frustratingly out of reach, leading his hunting party in circles through the dense wilderness that marked the edge of Silver Crescent territory. Marcus crouched beside a fallen tree, his enhanced senses scanning the forest around him. His personal guard, 4 seasoned warriors who had served him for decades, maintained a perimeter, while Darius, the young council member, watched the Alpha King with barely concealed awe. The restoration of Marcus's strength had transformed him from a deteriorating figurehead into the legendary warrior of pack lore, and the younger wolf had witnessed this metamorphosis with his own eyes. "The trail ends here," Marcus said, rising to his full height, frustration evident in the set of his powerful shoulders. "Again." "Like they simply vanished," Darius observed, his youthful face creased in confusion. "Or never existed at all." Marcus's golden eyes narrowed at this observation, which aligned too neatly with his own growing suspicions. 3 dead pack members suggest otherwise. "Unless they weren't killed by rogues at all," came a new voice from the shadows of the forest. Marcus and his guards spun toward the sound, claws extending instinctively, bodies tensing for combat. From between ancient pines emerged a figure that caused Marcus's wolf to stir with recognition rather than aggression. An older man with a bearing that suggested military discipline despite his 65 years. His silver hair cropped short above a weathered face mapped with the scars of countless battles. He wore the practical leathers of a hunter rather than the finery of Castle Blackthorne, and at his hip hung an old cavalry saber that had tasted the blood of both beasts and men. "Samuel," Marcus breathed, his stance relaxing incrementally. "You're a long way from your cabin, old friend." Samuel Oakenshield, former war chief of the Silver Crescent Pack, and Marcus's most trusted advisor before his self-imposed exile years ago, offered a slight bow that managed to convey both respect and irreverence. When the Alpha King starts chasing ghosts through the northern woods, it seemed an appropriate time to end my retirement. Darius looked between the 2 older men with confusion. "Your Majesty, who is this man?" "The only wolf in these territories who ever bested me in combat," Marcus replied, a rare smile softening his stern features as he clasped forearms with his old friend. "Samuel Oakenshield, war chief of the Silver Crescent Pack for 30 years, and the most stubborn, insubordinate pain in my side I've ever had the privilege to call brother." Samuel's weathered face creased in a smile that did nothing to soften the intensity of his gaze. "You look better than reports suggested, old friend, significantly less dead than rumored." "A recent development," Marcus admitted. "One I suspect you already know about, given your timely appearance." "News travels, even to hermits," Samuel acknowledged. "A royal wedding, a miraculous recovery, and now a wild chase after rogues who leave no tracks." His sharp eyes flicked toward Darius momentarily. "Perhaps we might speak privately, Your Majesty, for the sake of old times." Marcus considered the request for only a moment before nodding. "Make camp," he ordered his guards. "Darius, take first watch. Samuel and I have matters to discuss."
The younger wolf looked as if he might protest, but thought better of it under Marcus's steady gaze. With reluctant nods, the hunting party dispersed to establish their camp, leaving the two old warriors to walk deeper into the forest. When they were well beyond even werewolf hearing, Samuel spoke without preamble. "The council has betrayed you, Marcus, has been betraying you for longer than you know." Though he had suspected as much, hearing the accusations stated so plainly sent a chill through Marcus's blood. "The shadow plague was not natural, was it?" "No," Samuel confirmed grimly. "It was administered to you gradually over months. Small doses of silver and wolfsbane, enhanced with old magic. Not enough to kill you outright, but sufficient to suppress your wolf and weaken you to the point of eventual death. A death that would appear natural, allowing the council to install a puppet alpha of their choosing." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, his claws extending involuntarily as rage surged through him. "You have proof of this?" "I have sources within the castle walls. Loyal wolves who remembered what the Silver Crescent Pack stood for before Thaddeus and his cronies began their slow takeover." Samuel's expression darkened. "When I received word of your arranged marriage to the Callister girl, I knew something significant was unfolding. The timing was too convenient." "The council claimed the union might help restore my strength," Marcus said, thinking back to Alara's pale face, the way her life force had flowed into him during their bonding. It seems they were right, though not in the way they intended. "That's the fascinating part," Samuel mused. "According to my sources, they didn't expect any restoration at all. The ceremony was meant to be your last public appearance, a way to distract the pack while they finalized their plans for succession. The blood bond with the Callister girl was supposed to accelerate your decline, not reverse it." Marcus stopped walking, his mind racing as he processed this revelation. "The girl was meant to kill me?" "Not knowingly," Samuel clarified. "But yes, the ritual was designed to create a channel between you that would draw what remained of your strength into her, completing what the poisoning had begun. Instead, the opposite occurred. Your wolf awakened and began drawing her life force to combat the shadow plague." "But why?" Marcus demanded, frustration building within him. What could possibly have gone wrong with their ritual? Samuel's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle piece fitting into place. The Callister bloodline. It's unique in ways the council either didn't know or deliberately ignored. The girl isn't just any wolfless Omega, Marcus. She's a descendant of the Shadow Hunters. The name sent a jolt through Marcus's system. The Shadow Hunters were more legend than history to modern werewolves, humans who had supposedly possessed the ability to hunt and kill werewolves centuries ago, before the Great Packs had established their territories and treaties. They were said to command darkness itself, turning a werewolf's own shadow against it. "That's impossible," Marcus growled. "The Shadow Hunters were eradicated generations ago, and they were human enemies of our kind, not potential mates." "Not eradicated," Samuel corrected, "assimilated. After the Great War, the few remaining Shadow Hunters were offered a choice, execution or integration into werewolf society. Those who chose integration were bound by blood rituals that suppressed their abilities but allowed them to live among us. Over generations, most bloodlines thinned to insignificance, but a few remained pure, including the maternal line of the Callisters." "Alara carries the blood of werewolf hunters?" The irony was almost too much to process. "And the council bound her to me knowing this?" "I suspect Thaddeus knew exactly what she was," Samuel said gravely. "The shadow plague itself is derived from ancient shadow hunter techniques for weakening alpha werewolves. By binding you to a descendant of those who created such magic, they intended to complete the circle. What they didn't anticipate was the protective nature of the mating bond superseding their ritual. Instead of her shadow hunter blood finishing the job of killing you, your alpha essence recognized a potential cure within her." Marcus paced, his wolf agitated beneath his skin. "So my survival comes at the cost of draining the life from an innocent girl who was manipulated as thoroughly as I was." "So, there's more," Samuel said, his voice dropping even lower. "The rogues you're chasing don't exist. The dead pack members were killed by council loyalists, their bodies arranged to mimic rogue attacks." "To lure me from the castle," Marcus realized, cold dread replacing his anger. Away from Alara. Why? Because you survived the bonding, they needed a new plan. My guess? They're preparing a second ritual, one that will sever your connection to the girl and complete what the first failed to do. Without another word, Marcus turned and began striding back toward the camp, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Samuel caught his arm, surprising the Alpha with his boldness. Charging back to the castle without a plan plays directly into their hands, Marcus. They'll expect your rage. They'll be prepared for it. Every moment I spend in these woods is another moment Alara remains in danger, Marcus snarled. She is my mate. My wolf will not abandon her to Thaddeus's schemes. And rushing in blindly might get you both killed, Samuel countered, unflinching in the face of the Alpha's anger. There are forces at work beyond simple politics. The shadow plague, the blood rituals, the shadow hunter connection. These point to something darker, something ancient that Thaddeus has awakened or allied with. Marcus's wolf prowled restlessly within him, torn between the primal need to protect his mate and the strategic wisdom of his oldest friend. After a long moment, he forced himself to take a calming breath. What do you propose? First, we eliminate the council's eyes and ears, Samuel said, glancing meaningfully back toward the camp where Darius waited. Then we make our way back to the castle through channels they won't be watching. I have allies in the eastern valleys who can help us move undetected. And Alara? The question emerged as almost a growl. You can feel her through your bond, can't you? Samuel asked. Focus on that connection. Is she in immediate danger? Marcus closed his eyes, reaching inward to the strange new tether that linked his spirit to Alara's. It was faint with distance, but undeniably present, a golden thread stretching back toward Castle Blackthorn. He could sense her life force, diminished but steady, and no immediate distress. She lives, he confirmed. She is weak, but not in pain. Then we have a small window to act strategically rather than reactively. One day to reach my allies in the east, then a forced march back to the castle through hidden routes. We can be within the castle walls before the next full moon, when my sources suggest they plan to complete whatever ritual they've prepared. Marcus nodded reluctantly, his tactical mind acknowledging the wisdom in Samuel's plan, even as his wolf raged against any delay in returning to his mate. One day, he conceded, no more. As they turned to walk back toward the camp, Samuel's expression softened slightly. There is one piece of hope in all this darkness, old friend. If I'm right about the Callister girl's bloodline, she may have inherited more than just the vulnerability the Council sought to exploit. The Shadow Hunters were formidable adversaries precisely because of their unique abilities. If those abilities lie dormant within her, awakened by your bond rather than suppressed by it, she may prove to be not your downfall, but your most powerful ally. The possibility hung in the air between them as they approached the camp, where Darius watched their return with poorly concealed suspicion. Within minutes, Marcus had assigned the young council member to scout ahead, a mission from which Samuel quietly ensured he would not return. By nightfall, the hunting party had changed direction, moving east through ancient forests toward allies the council knew nothing about, and a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of an alpha and his mate, but the future of the Silver Crescent Pack itself. Back at Castle Blackthorn, Alara Callister, now Blackthorn by marriage if not yet by true bond, stood at the window of the royal chambers, watching a storm gather on the distant mountains. 3 days had passed since Marcus had departed for the northern border. 3 days of increasing weakness as the strange bond between them continued to drain her life force even across the distance that separated them. The door opened behind her, and she turned to see Victoria Ravenwing enter with a silver tray bearing a steaming cup. The dark-haired advisor moved with the fluid grace natural to born werewolves, setting the tray on a small table near the fire. "Thaddeus insists you drink this tonic," Victoria said, her tone carefully neutral. "For your strength." Alara regarded the cup with unconcealed suspicion. "The last 3 tonics have only made me weaker. Perhaps the Council's understanding of wolfless physiology is not as comprehensive as they believe." A flicker of something. Amusement? Respect? crossed Victoria's normally impassive features. "Perhaps not," she conceded. "Though in fairness, your condition is unprecedented. No wolfless Omega has ever formed a bond with an Alpha before, let alone one afflicted with the shadow plague." Alara moved away from the window, her steps careful as she navigated the persistent dizziness that plagued her. "Tell me, Lady Ravenwing, how long have you served on the council?" 12 years, Victoria replied, watching the younger woman with calculating eyes. "I was appointed after the border skirmishes with the Red Claw Pack, where I served as a strategic advisor to the king." "And in those 12 years," Alara continued, lowering herself gracefully into a chair opposite Victoria, "did you ever question the council's motives regarding the king's illness? Or was loyalty to Thaddeus always your priority?" The direct challenge hung in the air between them. Victoria's expression remained carefully controlled, but Alara noticed her hands tense slightly. "My loyalty is to the Silver Crescent Pack," she said finally, "as it should be for all of us." "A diplomatic non-answer," Alara observed, "worthy of a council member." Victoria leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Careful, Your Majesty. The walls of Castle Blackthorn have ears, and not all of them report to your husband." Before Alara could respond to this warning, the chamber doors swung open again, this time admitting Thaddeus Ironwood himself. The elderly council leader moved with surprising vigor for his 70 years, his silver hair and beard immaculately groomed, his robes of office emphasizing his distinguished position. "Ah, I see Victoria has brought your evening tonic," he observed, his tone avuncular, but his eyes cold as they assessed Alara's weakened state. "You really must drink it, my dear. The king would be most displeased if he returned to find you further diminished." "How thoughtful of you to concern yourself with the king's feelings," Alara replied, making no move toward the steaming cup. "Have there been any messages from the northern border?" Thaddeus exchanged a brief glance with Victoria before answering. "I'm afraid not. The hunting party has moved deep into the wilderness. We do not expect word until they have completed their mission." A lie. Alara was certain of it, though she couldn't have explained how she knew. Perhaps it was simply the way the shadows in the room seemed to deepen around Thaddeus as he spoke, gathering at his feet like loyal hounds. She blinked, and the strange perception vanished, leaving her wondering if her weakened state was causing hallucinations. "You should rest," Thaddeus continued, moving closer to stand beside her chair. "The bonding ritual has taken a greater toll than anyone anticipated, particularly on one without a wolf's natural resilience." "Yet the king's strength returns even as mine fades," Alara noted, looking up at him with clear violet eyes. "A curious inversion of what the council predicted, wouldn't you say?" Thaddeus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The ways of ancient magic are often unpredictable. All the more reason for you to conserve your strength and drink your tonic." He nodded toward the untouched cup, his tone hardening slightly. "I insist." Something in his manner, a subtle shift from solicitous to commanding, triggered a warning in Alara's mind. With deliberate slowness, she reached for the cup, lifting it to her lips but not drinking. "What exactly is in this tonic, Lord Ironwood?" "Herbs to strengthen the blood, remedies passed down through generations of pack healers." He watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Nothing that would harm the king's mate, I assure you." Alara held his gaze as she lowered the cup without drinking. "Then you won't mind if I have the royal physician examine it first. After all, as you say, I lack a wolf's natural resilience. We should be certain it's suited to my unique physiology." Thaddeus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's no need for such precautions. I supervise the preparation myself." "All the more reason for caution," Alara replied softly. "As we've established, the council's understanding of my condition is incomplete at best." For a tense moment it seemed Thaddeus might insist further, but Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps we should allow Her Majesty to rest. The physician can review the tonic's composition in the morning, when she's better rested." She placed a hand on Thaddeus's arm, a gesture that appeared deferential, but carried an unmistakable warning. The king was most explicit about not causing his mate any distress. Thaddeus's nostrils flared slightly, but he inclined his head in acquiescence. "Of course. Rest well, Your Majesty. We shall speak again tomorrow." After they had departed, Elara remained motionless in her chair, staring at the suspicious tonic. The longer she focused on it, the more she became aware of something strange. A faint darkness seemed to swirl within the liquid, visible not to her eyes, but to some other sense she couldn't name. On impulse, she reached out toward the cup, not touching it, but holding her hand above it. The darkness within the liquid responded to her proximity, swirling more vigorously, reaching tendrils upward as if seeking her touch. Gasping, she pulled her hand back. This was no mere tonic. Whatever Thaddeus had put in that cup was meant to harm her, or perhaps to influence her in some way she couldn't comprehend. With renewed suspicion, she surveyed the room, suddenly aware of shadows that seemed deeper than they should be, more substantial somehow. Was this another effect of her weakened state? Or was she perceiving something that had always been present but invisible to normal senses? Carefully, she rose and moved to the massive bed, sinking onto its edge as exhaustion washed over her. Whatever was happening, she needed to conserve her strength. Marcus was far away, hunting rogues that might or might not exist. She was alone in a castle full of potential enemies, bound to an alpha she barely knew by a magical connection that was slowly draining the life from her. Her only advantage was that the council clearly hadn't anticipated the exact nature of the bond that had formed. They had expected her to be the conduit of Marcus's death, not his salvation. As she lay back against the pillows, surrendering to the exhaustion that claimed more of her with each passing day, Elara's thoughts turned to her father. Lord Edmund Callister had been too ill to attend the wedding ceremony, but he would have heard of the miraculous events that followed. Was he safe? Had the council taken precautions to ensure his silence, knowing what they had intended for his daughter? She had sacrificed herself to secure his position and comfort, but if the council's true plans had gone awry, would they still honor that arrangement? Sleep claimed her before she could pursue these dark thoughts further, and as she drifted into unconsciousness, the shadows in the royal chamber seemed to deepen and shift, gathering around her bed like silent guardians, or patient predators waiting for their moment to strike. The dream came as it always did, beginning with darkness and ending with fire. Elara stood in a forest clearing under a moonless sky, surrounded by ancient stones carved with symbols she couldn't read, but somehow understood. A knowledge passed through blood rather than learning. Her bare feet pressed against earth that pulsed with old power, and her simple white shift glowed faintly in the darkness, as if her skin itself emanated light. From the forest emerged figures in dark robes, their faces hidden by deep hoods. They moved with inhuman grace, encircling her, their chanting a low drone that vibrated through her bones. In their hands they carried silver daggers that caught non-existent light, gleaming with malevolent purpose. "Daughter of Shadow, Bride of Light," they chanted, their voices a discordant harmony. "The vessel empties, the shadow fills." One figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, authority evident in every movement. When he lowered his hood, Thaddeus Ironwood's face emerged from the darkness, but not as Elara knew him. This version of the council leader had eyes that were entirely black, like pools of liquid shadow, and veins of darkness crawled beneath his skin like living tattoos. "The Ancient One awakens," Thaddeus intoned, raising his dagger. "And you, hollow vessel, shall be its doorway into this world." He lunged forward, blade aimed at Elara's heart. But before it could pierce her flesh, a massive silver wolf erupted from the surrounding forest, its fur gleaming like moonlight, its golden eyes blazing with protective fury. The wolf's attack scattered the robed figures, its massive jaws closing around Thaddeus's arm, crushing bone and sinew. As the dream Thaddeus screamed, the real Elara woke with a gasp, sitting upright in the royal bed. Moonlight streamed through the windows, painting the chamber in silver and shadow. Her heart raced as the dream's images lingered vividly in her mind. This was no ordinary nightmare. It carried the weight and texture of a vision or warning. "You're beginning to see," came a voice from the darkest corner of the room. Alara froze, her eyes straining to penetrate the shadows. Slowly, a figure emerged, Victoria Ravenwing, her elegant features composed in an expression of cautious assessment. She moved to the bedside, her steps silent on the stone floor. "How long have you been watching me sleep?" Alara demanded, drawing the bedcovers around herself instinctively. "Long enough to witness the shadows responding to your distress," Victoria replied, gesturing to the room around them. "Look." Alara followed her gaze and gasped softly. The shadows cast by the moonlight weren't behaving as shadows should. They stretched toward her bed, unnaturally elongated, pulsing slightly as if alive and breathing. As her shock registered, they retreated to their natural positions, once again becoming mere absences of light rather than entities of their own. "What is happening to me?" Alara whispered, a tremble entering her voice, despite her efforts to remain composed. Victoria's expression softened marginally. "Your heritage is awakening. The blood bond with Marcus has activated something that has lain dormant in your lineage for generations." "My heritage?" Alara echoed. "What do you know of my heritage?" "More than Thaddeus realizes," Victoria replied, moving to close the chamber door securely before returning to Alara's bedside. The Callister line descends from the Shadow Hunters, humans who once possessed the ability to command darkness itself, to turn a werewolf's own shadow against it. They were formidable adversaries to our kind before the Great Peace. Alara shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. My father would have told me of such a lineage." "Would he?" Victoria challenged gently. "When such knowledge could mean death in a society ruled by werewolves, the Shadowhunters were defeated centuries ago. Those who survived were integrated into werewolf society through blood rituals that supposedly suppressed their abilities. Over generations, most lost their powers entirely. But some bloodlines, kept pure through careful marriages, retained the potential." "The Callisters," Alara murmured, pieces falling into place. "Is that why we produce wolfless offspring? Because our human blood is too strong to accept the wolf spirit?" Victoria nodded. "Precisely. And it's why Thaddeus selected you specifically for this union. The shadow plague that afflicted Marcus is an ancient weapon derived from shadow hunter magic, a poison that targets an alpha's connection to their wolf. By binding you to him through blood, Thaddeus intended to complete the curse. Your shadow hunter blood was meant to be the final key that locked Marcus's wolf away permanently." "But it had the opposite effect," Alara realized, thinking back to the shocking moment when their blood had mingled and Marcus's wolf had roared back to life. "Yes, and that has thrown all of Thaddeus's plans into chaos. The mating bond created a channel through which Marcus's alpha essence is drawing on your life force to combat the shadow plague. It's keeping him alive and his wolf awake, but at the cost of draining you." "To what end?" Alara asked, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what Victoria was revealing. "Why would Thaddeus want Marcus dead? He has served the Silver Crescent Pack loyally for decades." Victoria's expression darkened. "Thaddeus serves something far older and darker than the Pack, something that has promised him power beyond mortal understanding. He calls it the Ancient One, a being of pure shadow that existed before werewolves, before humans. It requires a vessel to enter our world fully, a vessel with the blood of both wolf and shadow." "Me," Alara whispered, the fragments of her nightmare suddenly making terrible sense. "The hollow vessel. Yes, but the ritual went wrong. Instead of the mating bond making you more receptive to the Ancient One's influence, it has awakened your shadow hunter abilities that might eventually allow you to resist possession." Victoria's eyes gleamed with a hint of triumph. "It's why the tonics Thaddeus insists you drink contain elements designed to suppress those awakening powers while weakening your connection to Marcus." Alara stared at the older woman, suspicion replacing shock. "Why are you telling me this? You're a council member, Thaddeus's ally." "Israel. I am a Ravenwing before I am a council member," Victoria replied, a fierce pride entering her tone. My family has served as guardians against the Ancient One for generations, working from within to monitor those who would summon it. I joined the council 12 years ago when I recognized the signs of Thaddeus's corruption. I could not prevent the shadow plague or your forced marriage, but I can help you now, if you're willing to embrace your heritage and fight. Alara studied the older woman, searching for signs of deception, but finding only grim determination. Through the strange new senses that were awakening within her, she could perceive no darkness clinging to Victoria as it had to Thaddeus in her dream. "How?" she asked finally. "I'm growing weaker by the day. I know nothing of shadow hunter abilities or how to use them." "There is someone who can teach you," Victoria said. "Someone who has preserved the old knowledge. But we must move quickly." Thaddeus plans to complete the ritual during the full moon, 3 nights from now, when the bond between you and Marcus will be at its strongest. "Marcus is far from the castle," Alara pointed out, "hunting rogues at the northern border." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "There are no rogues. The attacks were staged to lure Marcus away from you, to isolate you when you're most vulnerable. But he's no fool, and he has allies Thaddeus knows nothing about. I've received word that he's already making his way back to the castle through secret routes." Hope flared briefly in Alara's chest before reality dampened it. "Even if he returns, what can we do? I'm weakening, and Thaddeus controls the castle. The pack respects his authority." "The pack respects strength," Victoria corrected. "And there is no greater strength than an alpha and his true mate united in purpose. If you can master even a fraction of your heritage before the full moon, and if Marcus returns in time, you might stand a chance against whatever Thaddeus has planned." She extended her hand to Alara. "Will you trust me?" Alara hesitated only briefly before clasping the offered hand. What choice did she have? Remain passive and allow herself to be used as a doorway for some ancient evil, or take action, however desperate? "Yes," she said firmly. "Teach me what I need to know." Victoria's smile was grim but satisfied. "We begin now, while the castle sleeps and the shadows are deepest. Your first lesson: shadows are not simply an absence of light. They are entities unto themselves, repositories of ancient power for those with the blood to command them, and you, Alara Blackthorn, have that blood in abundance." As dawn crept over the eastern mountains, painting Castle Blackthorn's imposing towers in hues of gold and amber, Samuel Oakenshield led Marcus through a forgotten tunnel beneath the ancient fortress. The passage was narrow and damp, carved through solid rock centuries ago as an escape route for Blackthorn alphas during times of siege. Few remembered its existence now, which made it the perfect route to re-enter the castle undetected. "The entrance to the royal chambers should be just ahead," Samuel murmured, his voice barely audible even to Marcus's enhanced hearing. "A stone panel behind the southern tapestry." Marcus nodded, his focus split between navigating the dark passage and the tenuous bond he could feel pulling him toward Alara. The connection had grown stronger as they approached the castle, and through it he sensed not just her physical weakness, but a strange new energy awakening within her. Something wild and ancient that both intrigued and concerned his wolf. "She's different," he said quietly. "I can feel it through the bond. Something is changing in her." Samuel glanced back at him, the torch he carried casting deep shadows across his weathered features. "The shadow hunter blood responding to the bond, perhaps. If I'm right, your alpha essence isn't just drawing life force from her. It's awakening dormant abilities her ancestors possessed." To what end? Marcus wondered. What purpose could such an awakening serve? "That," Samuel replied grimly, "depends entirely on whose purpose we're discussing. Yours, hers, or whatever entity Thaddeus serves." They reached a blank stone wall that appeared solid, but upon closer inspection showed faint seams outlining a concealed door. Samuel ran his fingers along the edge until he found a small depression. Pressing it triggered an ancient mechanism, and the panel slid sideways with a soft groan of protesting stone. Beyond lay the royal chambers, dimly lit by the early morning sun filtering through heavy curtains. The massive bed that dominated the room was empty, its covers disturbed as if its occupant had left in haste. Marcus inhaled deeply, sorting through the scents that filled the chamber. Alara's was prominent, a delicate blend of rainwater and night-blooming flowers that stirred his wolf in ways he wasn't yet prepared to examine. But mingled with it was another scent he recognized. "Victoria Ravenwing has been here," he growled, moving further into the room, his senses alert for danger. "Recently." "Not necessarily an enemy," Samuel reminded him. "My sources suggested she may be playing a deeper game than simple loyalty to Thaddeus." Marcus circled the chamber, gathering information through scent and observation. No signs of struggle. No fear pheromones. If Victoria took Alara from this room, it wasn't against her will. His gaze fell on a silver cup sitting untouched on a small table. "What's this?" Samuel approached cautiously, lifting the cup and sniffing its contents. His expression hardened immediately, and he set it down with deliberate care. Poison, though not the kind that kills quickly. Wolfsbane, silver extract, and something older, shadow root, I believe it's called. An herb used by shadow hunters to weaken a werewolf's connection to their wolf spirit. "Thaddeus," Marcus snarled, his claws extending reflexively. "He's been poisoning her while I've been away." "Or attempting to," Samuel observed. "The cup is full. She didn't drink it." He moved to the window, peering out at the castle grounds below. "If Victoria has taken her, where would they go? Not to the council chambers, surely." Marcus closed his eyes, concentrating on the bond that connected him to his mate. It pulled him not upward toward the council's tower, but downward, deep beneath the castle. "The old library," he said, opening his eyes with sudden certainty. "In the eastern foundations. It houses the most ancient texts in the castle, records that predate even the Blackthorn line." "A fitting place to hide a shadow hunter descendant," Samuel agreed. "The eastern foundations contain the oldest magic in the castle, wards and protections laid by the first werewolf packs when they established their territories." Without further discussion, they moved back toward the secret passage, resealing it behind them before taking a branching tunnel that led deeper beneath the castle. As they descended through the darkness, Marcus felt the bond with Alara strengthen, confirming they were moving in the right direction. But along with that confirmation came a wave of anxiety. Whatever was happening to his mate, whatever changes were occurring within her, time was running short to prevent Thaddeus from completing his plans. The ancient library lay behind massive oak doors, reinforced with iron bands, deep in the oldest section of Castle Blackthorn's foundations. When Marcus and Samuel emerged from a hidden passage into the corridor outside those doors, they found themselves face to face with Victoria Ravenwing, who stood guard with a silver dagger in her hand. For a tense moment, the three werewolves regarded each other in silence, muscles coiled in preparation for potential combat. Then Victoria slowly lowered her weapon, inclining her head in a gesture of cautious respect. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "you've returned earlier than expected." "Where is my mate?" Marcus demanded, his voice a low growl of barely restrained aggression. Victoria's dark eyes assessed him carefully before she answered. Inside, attempting to master abilities she never knew she possessed, abilities that may be our only defense against what Thaddeus plans for the full moon. "And what exactly does Thaddeus plan?" Samuel asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his cavalry saber, his posture making it clear he didn't entirely trust the council member. "To open a doorway," Victoria replied grimly. "A doorway for something ancient and terrible to enter our world. Something that has been whispering to him for years, corrupting him, promising him power in exchange for a suitable vessel." Her gaze shifted to Marcus. "A vessel with the combined blood of alpha werewolf and shadow hunter. Your mate." Marcus's growl deepened, the sound rumbling from his chest like distant thunder. "I'll tear him apart before he touches her again." "Brute force won't be enough," Victoria cautioned. "The entity Thaddeus serves exists primarily in shadow. It can't be fought with claws and fangs alone. That's why I brought Alara here, to help her understand and develop her heritage." She gestured toward the library doors. "See for yourself." After a moment's hesitation and a brief nod from Samuel, Marcus pushed open the heavy doors. The ancient library beyond was a vast chamber lined with towering shelves that groaned beneath the weight of countless tomes, scrolls, and tablets. Centuries of accumulated knowledge gathered by the Silver Crescent Pack, illuminated by dozens of enchanted lanterns that cast a warm golden glow throughout the space. In the center of the chamber stood Ilara, her slender form silhouetted against a circle of lanterns arranged on the floor around her. Her eyes were closed in intense concentration, her arms extended at her sides, palms facing downward. And all around her, the shadows cast by the lanterns moved in ways that defied natural law, stretching, swirling, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. As Marcus watched in stunned silence, Ilara opened her eyes, and where her violet irises had once been, now gleamed orbs of liquid darkness, flecked with points of light, like stars in a midnight sky. She looked directly at him, and a smile of relief transformed her face. "Marcus," she breathed, and the unnatural shadows around her dissipated instantly, returning to their normal state as her eyes faded back to their natural violet. She swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Marcus was across the chamber in 3 long strides, catching her as her knees buckled. He gathered her against his chest, his wolf howling with possessive concern at how fragile she felt in his arms. Through their bond he could feel her weakness, but also a new current of power that pulsed just beneath the surface of her consciousness. "What have you done to her?" he demanded, looking over his shoulder at Victoria, who had followed him into the library with Samuel close behind. "Helped her begin to reclaim her birthright," Victoria answered calmly. "The shadow hunter abilities that have lain dormant in her bloodline for generations, abilities that Thaddeus sought to exploit but never fully understood." Ilara's hand came up to touch Marcus's face, drawing his attention back to her. "It's true," she said softly. "I can feel it now. The shadows respond to me. I can sense them, direct them." Her voice lowered to a near whisper. "I can see them clinging to people, Marcus. Dark tendrils attached to members of the council, feeding on them, controlling them. Thaddeus is almost consumed by them." Samuel moved closer, his expression grave. "The Ancient One's influence. It corrupts through shadow, turning its servants into extensions of itself." "But not everyone in the castle is tainted," Ilara continued, her strength returning slightly as she remained in Marcus's embrace. "Many of the pack are untouched. They follow the council out of tradition and respect, not knowing what truly guides Thaddeus's decisions." Marcus helped Ilara to a nearby chair, kneeling beside her as she sank into it. "Victoria tells me Thaddeus plans some ritual for the full moon, that he intends to use you as a vessel for this Ancient One. The union of Alpha and Shadowhunter creates a unique vessel," Victoria explained, joining them at the center of the library. "A body capable of housing immense power without being immediately destroyed by it. Thaddeus has been preparing for this moment for years, slowly poisoning you with the shadow plague to weaken your wolf, arranging Ilara's marriage to you to create the bond that would make her receptive to possession." "But the ritual went wrong," Samuel added. "Instead of suppressing Marcus's wolf and preparing Ilara for possession, the blood bond awakened both his strength and her latent abilities." "It forced Thaddeus to accelerate his plans," Victoria confirmed. "The tonics he's been trying to make Ilara drink contain elements designed to suppress her emerging powers while keeping her weak enough to be overtaken during the full moon ritual." Marcus's hand tightened around Ilara's, his protective instincts roaring to the surface. "Then we stop him. Now, before the full moon, I'll call the pack together, expose his treachery, reclaim my authority as Alpha." "It's not that simple," Victoria cautioned. "Many in the council have been corrupted by the Ancient One's influence. They'll stand with Thaddeus. And without proof, the pack may see this as nothing more than a power struggle between an aging Alpha and his loyal council." "Then we get proof," Marcus growled. "Documents, witnesses, whatever it takes." Samuel, who had been examining the ancient text spread across a nearby table, looked up with sudden interest. "Perhaps we already have it," he said, lifting a brittle parchment covered in faded script. This appears to be a first-hand account of a similar attempt to summon the Ancient One 3 centuries ago. It describes the corruption of a pack council, the preparation of a vessel, and the signs by which the Ancient One's influence can be identified. "Is there a way to defeat it?" Alara asked, leaning forward despite her weakness. Samuel scanned the text rapidly. It speaks of a confrontation during the Black Moon, what we would now call a new moon, when darkness is complete. The shadow hunters allied with uncorrupted werewolves to drive the entity back into the void from which it came. His expression grew troubled. But the cost was high. Many died, including the intended vessel. A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications sank in. Finally, Marcus broke it, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha. "We have until the full moon, 2 nights from now. We'll use that time to gather allies within the pack, those untouched by this corruption." "Victoria, you'll continue working with Alara to develop her abilities. Samuel, find anything else in these records that might help us counter whatever ritual Thaddeus has planned." "And you?" Alara asked, her violet eyes meeting his golden ones with a directness that stirred something beyond mere protectiveness in his chest. "I," Marcus said grimly, "will ensure that Thaddeus remains unaware of my return. The element of surprise may be our greatest advantage." He rose to his full height, the mantle of alpha authority settling around him like a cloak. "Make no mistake, this is war. Not just for control of the Silver Crescent Pack, but for the future of our kind. If this Ancient One succeeds in gaining a foothold in our world through Alara, none of us will remain free for long." As if summoned by his declaration, a distant howl echoed through the castle, the signal that announced the imminent arrival of important visitors. Victoria moved swiftly to one of the library's narrow windows, peering out at the castle courtyard below. "Riders approaching from the east," she reported, "flying the banner of the Silver Fang Pack." "Catherine Silverbane," Marcus murmured, recognition and something more complex flickering across his features. "What is she doing here?" "I sent for her," Victoria admitted. 3 days ago, when I realized what Thaddeus was planning. The Silver Fang Pack has its own histories with the Ancient One. Their archives might contain knowledge ours does not. And Catherine, she hesitated, glancing between Marcus and Alara. Catherine has always been a staunch ally of the true alpha of the Silver Crescent Pack. A complicated emotion passed through the bond between Marcus and Alara, a mixture of old affection, respect, and wariness that made Alara wonder exactly what relationship her new mate had shared with this Catherine Silverbane. "Will she help us?" Alara asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. "If anyone will stand against Thaddeus regardless of the cost, it's Kate," Marcus confirmed. "She leads the Silver Fang Pack with an iron will, and she has no love for the Council's political games." A faint smile touched his lips. "She also happens to be the most skilled warrior I've ever fought beside, wolf or human." "Then it seems our alliance grows stronger," Samuel observed. "But we must move carefully. Thaddeus must not know you've returned, nor that Alara is developing her abilities. Let him believe his plan proceeds unopposed, while we gather our strength." Marcus nodded in agreement before turning back to Alara, his expression softening as he took in her exhausted state. "You need rest," he said, concern evident in his voice. "The bond is still draining you to heal me." "I'll manage," Alara assured him, though the shadows under her eyes told a different story. "My heritage seems to be providing some resistance to the drain, the more I learn to access it." "Nevertheless," Victoria interjected, "we must find a way to balance the bond before the full moon. If you're too weakened, you won't be able to defend against the possession ritual, regardless of your shadow hunter abilities." Marcus's jaw tightened with frustration and guilt. "My strength comes at her expense. Is there no way to reverse the flow, to let my wolf's energy strengthen her instead?" "Perhaps," Samuel mused, his strategic mind already working on the problem. "The blood ritual created this channel between you. It stands to reason that a second ritual might alter its nature." He turned back to the ancient text spread across the library table. "I'll search for precedents." Outside in the castle courtyard, horns sounded to announce the formal reception of the Silver Fang delegation. Time was running short for decisions. Marcus looked down at Alara, a question in his golden eyes that he didn't voice aloud, but she felt through their strengthening bond. "Do you trust me to protect you?" In answer, Alara reached up to touch his face, her slender fingers tracing the line of his jaw with unexpected tenderness. "We face this together," she said softly. "Alpha and Luna, wolf and shadow, whatever comes." Something shifted in Marcus's expression then, a softening, a recognition of something beyond the political alliance or magical bond that had united them. For the briefest moment, he leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as if committing the sensation to memory. "Together," he agreed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Alara's very core. "Now rest, gather your strength. When Catherine arrives, we'll need all the allies and knowledge we can muster." As Marcus helped Alara to a makeshift bed arranged among the ancient texts, Victoria and Samuel withdrew to the library entrance, speaking in hushed tones about security arrangements and how to smuggle Catherine Silverbane to their hidden sanctuary without Thaddeus's knowledge. Outside the castle walls, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward Castle Blackthorn like grasping fingers. The full moon approached. The Ancient One stirred in its shadow realm, and in the depths of the ancient library, an unlikely alliance prepared for a battle that would determine not just their fates, but the balance between light and darkness in the world of wolves and men. The Silver Fang delegation arrived with minimal ceremony but maximum presence. 4 warriors in battle leathers flanked their alpha as she strode through Castle Blackthorn's massive gates, her posture radiating authority that needed no crown or formal declaration. Catherine Silverbane stood a full head shorter than most of her male counterparts, yet commanded attention through sheer force of personality. At 40, she had led the Silver Fang Pack for 15 years, assuming leadership after defeating 3 challengers in combat following her father's death. Her silver blonde hair was pulled back in a tight braid that hung to her waist, revealing a face both beautiful and battle-hardened, marked with a single scar that ran from temple to jaw on her left side. Thaddeus Ironwood greeted her in the central courtyard, his elderly frame somehow managing to convey both deference and condescension simultaneously. "Alpha Silverbane," he intoned, offering the formal bow due to a visiting pack leader. "The Silver Crescent Pack welcomes you, though your arrival comes as something of a surprise." Catherine's ice-blue eyes assessed him with undisguised suspicion. "Where is Marcus?" she asked, ignoring the diplomatic niceties. "I received word of his recovery from the Shadow Plague. I expected him to greet an allied alpha personally." The council leader's expression remained perfectly composed, though a flicker of something, annoyance, concern, passed behind his eyes. "King Blackthorn leads a hunting party in the Northern Territories. Rogue wolves attacked our border settlements. As his closest ally, I'm sure you understand that pack security must take precedence over diplomatic courtesies." "Indeed," Catherine agreed, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word of his explanation. "When do you expect his return?" "Difficult to say," Thaddeus replied with carefully measured regret. "The rogues have proven elusive." Catherine's gaze shifted briefly to the castle's upper towers before returning to Thaddeus. "And his new queen? I understand the bonding ritual had unexpected effects." A thread of tension entered Thaddeus's voice, despite his efforts to maintain his avuncular facade. "Queen Alara rests. The bond has taken a significant toll on her constitution, particularly given her unusual nature." "How unfortunate," Catherine said, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. "I had hoped to pay my respects to the new Luna of the Silver Crescent Pack, perhaps when she has recovered sufficiently." "Of course," Thaddeus agreed smoothly. "In the meantime, chambers have been prepared for you and your warriors in the Eastern Wing. I trust you will find them comfortable during your stay, however brief it may be." The dismissal was subtle, but unmistakable. Catherine acknowledged it with the barest inclination of her head. "How considerate. We shall retire there shortly to refresh ourselves after our journey. Though first, I should like to visit your ancient library. The Silver Fang archives contain references to texts held only by the Silver Crescent Pack, texts I've long wished to consult for historical research. Thaddeus's smile froze for a fraction of a second. The ancient library? I fear it's been sealed for preservation work these past months. Most unfortunate timing. Perhaps another area of the castle might interest you instead, suggested Victoria Ravenwing, appearing beside Thaddeus with such quiet grace that several of Catherine's warriors tensed instinctively. The Western Observatory offers spectacular views of the territories, and I believe the Silver Fang lands can be seen clearly on days such as this. Catherine regarded Victoria with newfound interest. Lady Ravenwing, it's been some time since our paths crossed at the territorial summit. Your suggestion has merit. Would you be so kind as to escort me personally? I find diplomatic discussions flow more naturally when walking. Victoria bowed, a gesture that somehow conveyed more sincerity than Thaddeus's earlier formalities. It would be my honor, Alpha Silverbane. As the two women departed, followed at a discreet distance by Catherine's personal guard, Thaddeus watched with narrowed eyes, his fingers unconsciously gripping the silver wolf's head that topped his ceremonial staff with enough force to whiten his knuckles. "Have the eastern wing monitored," he murmured to a nearby aide, "every entrance, every window, and double the guard on the ancient library. No one enters without my explicit permission." The aide bowed and hurried away, leaving Thaddeus alone in the courtyard, his gaze fixed on Victoria's retreating form. Around his feet, shadows deepened and swirled in patterns that defied the afternoon sun, responding to emotions no elder statesman would willingly display before witnesses. Victoria led Catherine through a series of winding corridors and hidden passageways known only to those who had spent decades within Castle Blackthorn's ancient walls. They spoke little until they reached a narrow spiral staircase behind a tapestry depicting the legendary first alpha of the Silver Crescent Pack. "We're clear of watchers now," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we must move quickly. Thaddeus has eyes throughout the castle." Catherine's diplomatic mask fell away, revealing the fierce warrior beneath. "Where are they?" "The ancient library, as you suspected. It was a calculated risk to mention it in Thaddeus's presence, but it established your interest should you need to create a diversion later." "Marcus is truly back?" Catherine asked, a complex emotion flickering across her features. "Fully recovered?" "His wolf is awake, and his strength returns by the hour," Victoria confirmed as they descended the hidden staircase, "though it comes at a cost to his mate." "The Callister girl," Catherine murmured. "A wolfless Omega." When word reached the Silver Fang territories of Marcus binding himself to such a bride, many questioned his judgment, or his sanity. "It wasn't his choice," Victoria reminded her. "The council orchestrated the union for their own purposes, though fate seems to have had other plans." They reached the bottom of the staircase and proceeded through a narrow tunnel that sloped gently downward into the foundations of the castle. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of ancient stone and preserved parchment. "And what do you make of this unexpected queen?" Catherine asked, her tone deliberately casual. "Is she worthy of him?" Victoria glanced sideways at the Silver Fang Alpha, a knowing look in her dark eyes. "She is stronger than anyone anticipated, stronger, perhaps, than she knows herself to be, and she carries bloodlines that may prove crucial in the days ahead." Before Catherine could press for clarification, they arrived at the heavy oak doors of the ancient library. Victoria knocked in a specific pattern, 3 rapid taps followed by 2 slower ones. The door opened just wide enough to reveal Samuel Oakenshield's weathered face, which registered surprise and then approval at the sight of Catherine. "Well now," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his stern features. "The Silver Fang herself, right on schedule. Come in, both of you, quickly." The library beyond was transformed from the organized repository of ancient knowledge it had been just hours before. Maps and scrolls now covered every available surface, Ancient texts lay open on reading stands, and enchanted lanterns illuminated workspaces where Samuel had been transcribing key passages from deteriorating manuscripts. In the center of this organized chaos stood Marcus Blackthorne, his powerful frame bent over a large map of the Northern Territories, marking positions with small carved figures representing pack forces. He looked up as they entered, and for a moment the years fell away between him and Catherine. They had been more than allies once. Not quite mates, but something significant enough to leave echoes in their body language even now. A history of shared battles, shared losses, and shared moments that transcended pack boundaries. "Kate," he said simply, straightening to his full height. "Marcus," she replied, matching his tone precisely. Then, with a slight softening of her features, "You look considerably less dead than reported." A brief smile touched his lips. "Rumors of my demise were somewhat exaggerated." "Not entirely, from what I gather," Catherine countered, moving further into the library and surveying the research materials with a strategic eye. "Victoria says you've been poisoned for months. The shadow plague is no natural illness." "No," Marcus agreed grimly. "It was administered deliberately, part of a much larger plan orchestrated by Thaddeus and whatever entity he serves." Catherine nodded, as if this confirmed suspicions she had harbored for some time. "The Ancient One," she said, not a question, but a recognition. Legends of its influence appear in the Silver Fang archives as well. Attempts to summon it have occurred throughout our histories, always during times of transition or weakness in the pack structures. "Then you believe us," Samuel interjected, joining them at the central table. "The Silver Fang Pack has monitored the Silver Crescent Council for years," Catherine confirmed. "We've noted the shifting allegiances, the increasing isolation of pack members who question Thaddeus's decisions. When Victoria reached out through our shared contacts, it confirmed patterns we had already observed." She turned her attention back to Marcus, her ice-blue eyes assessing him with professional thoroughness. "You look stronger than when I saw you at the Winter Summit 6 months ago, but not yet at full capacity. The bond with your new mate sustains you, I assume?" A shadow of guilt crossed Marcus's features. "At her expense. Each day my strength returns, hers diminishes." "Where is she now?" Catherine asked, scanning the library. Marcus gestured toward a small alcove partially hidden by bookshelves, where Alara rested on a makeshift bed, her slender form covered with a fur cloak bearing the Blackthorn crest. "Sleeping. The shadow hunter training Victoria has begun with her drains what little energy she has left after our bond takes its share." Catherine moved toward the alcove, her steps silent on the stone floor. Marcus followed, his protective instincts evident in every line of his body. When they reached the alcove, Catherine studied the sleeping girl with an expression that slowly shifted from clinical assessment to something approaching respect. "She's fighting it," the Silver Fang Alpha observed quietly. "Most would have succumbed completely by now, allowing the bond to drain them dry. Yet she maintains enough strength to develop her abilities while sustaining you. Impressive." "She's stronger than she appears," Marcus agreed, his voice carrying an undertone that Catherine noted with a raised eyebrow. "You've developed feelings for your political bride," she said, not a question, but an observation. "Unexpected." Before Marcus could respond, Alara stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal violet irises clouded with exhaustion, but alert nonetheless. She took in the scene before her. Marcus standing protectively close, a strange woman regarding her with undisguised curiosity, and pushed herself up to a sitting position with dignified determination. "Alpha Silverbane, I presume," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Your reputation precedes you." Catherine's eyebrows rose fractionally, impressed by the younger woman's composure. "As does yours now, Luna Blackthorn, the wolfless Omega who reversed the shadow plague and awakened the dormant Alpha. Your bonding ceremony has become the subject of considerable speculation throughout the Northern Territories." "Most of which is probably exaggerated," Alara responded with unexpected dry humor. "The reality was considerably less dignified. I believe I fainted." A surprised laugh escaped Catherine, genuine amusement breaking through her reserved demeanor. I find I like you, Alara Blackthorn, which is fortunate, as it appears we'll be fighting side by side in the very near future. If I can stand by then, Alara acknowledged, gesturing ruefully at her weakened state. The bond continues to drain me faster than I can recover, despite Victoria's training. Catherine's expression shifted to one of serious consideration. There may be ways to address that. The Silver Fang archives contain references to methods for balancing life force between bonded pairs, techniques developed during the Great War, when many alphas were wounded and sustained through their mate's energy. Hope flickered in Alara's eyes. Could such methods be adapted to our situation? I'm not a true werewolf, and the bond formed under unusual circumstances. Your shadow hunter blood complicates matters, Catherine admitted, but it may also offer solutions unavailable to traditional werewolf pairs. She turned to Marcus. With your permission, I'll have my archivists send the relevant texts. They could be here by nightfall. Marcus nodded, his relief evident. Anything that might help balance the bond without endangering either of us further would be welcome. Samuel approached, carrying a worn leather tome that looked ancient even among the library's venerable collection. I may have found something relevant as well, he said, setting the book carefully on a nearby table. This account describes how shadow hunters could redirect energy flows, not just drain them as werewolf hunters, but actually balance them between compatible entities. Victoria joined them, her expression thoughtful. The techniques I've been teaching Alara focus on controlling shadows, not energy flows, but they're related disciplines. If we combine the Silver Fang knowledge with these shadow hunter techniques, we might create a more sustainable bond, Marcus finished, hope mingling with caution in his tone. One that strengthens both of us instead of draining Alara to heal me. It's worth attempting, Catherine agreed, but we must move quickly. The full moon approaches, and with it, whatever ritual Thaddeus has planned. Speaking of which, Samuel interjected, we need to discuss defensive strategies. Even if we stabilize the bond between Marcus and Alara, we still face the threat of the Ancient One and its corrupted servants. The group moved back to the central table, where maps of the castle and surrounding territories lay spread out in strategic display. Catherine immediately began assessing the tactical situation with the practiced eye of a born warrior. How many within the castle remain untainted by the Ancient One's influence? She asked. It's difficult to be precise, Victoria replied. The corruption manifests differently in different individuals. Some, like Thaddeus, are deeply infiltrated, their very essence intertwined with the shadow entity. Others merely follow his lead out of pack loyalty or political ambition, with minimal direct corruption. Alara can see the taint, Marcus added, glancing at his mate, who had joined them at the table with careful movements that betrayed her continuing weakness. Her shadow hunter blood gives her the ability to perceive the darkness clinging to those under the Ancient One's influence. A valuable skill, Catherine noted. Can you estimate numbers? How many are actively corrupted versus merely following orders? Alara considered the question, drawing on her limited experiences since her abilities had awakened. From what I've observed, perhaps a dozen are deeply corrupted, Thaddeus and his inner circle on the council. Another 30 or so show signs of minor infiltration. The rest of the castle residents, several hundred pack members, appear untainted, though many would follow council orders without question out of ingrained respect for authority. So we face not just supernatural corruption, but also the weight of pack hierarchy, Samuel summarized grimly. Even untainted wolves may fight for Thaddeus simply because he represents established authority. Then we must give them reason to question that authority, Marcus stated, the alpha command in his voice unmistakable. Proof of Thaddeus's corruption and true intentions for the pack. The ritual itself might provide that proof, Victoria suggested. If pack members witness Thaddeus attempting to channel an ancient evil through their Luna, many would turn against him regardless of hierarchy. A dangerous gamble, Catherine cautioned. By the time the ritual begins, it may already be too late to prevent the Ancient One from gaining a foothold. Agreed, Marcus said, his protective instincts flaring at the thought of Alara in such danger. We need to act before the full moon. Expose Thaddeus, rally the uncorrupted pack members to our side, and confront the council directly. With what evidence? Samuel asked pragmatically. Accusations of supernatural corruption will sound like a power grab without concrete proof. A contemplative silence fell over the group as they considered this fundamental obstacle. It was Alara who finally broke it, her voice soft but determined. "What if I could show them?" she suggested. "Not tell them, but actually show them the corruption. Make the shadows visible to all, not just to those with shadow hunter blood." All eyes turned to her with varying degrees of surprise and speculation. Victoria was the first to grasp the implications. "A revealing spell," she murmured. "The old texts mentioned shadow hunters who could force concealed darkness into visible manifestation, exposing those who served shadow entities." "Is such a thing possible?" Marcus asked, looking between Victoria and Alara with cautious hope. "Theoretically," Victoria confirmed, "but it would require significant power, more than Alara currently possesses in her weakened state." "Unless," Catherine began, her tactical mind already formulating possibilities. "What if the bond between you could be temporarily reversed? Instead of draining Alara to strengthen Marcus, what if Marcus channeled his alpha power to Alara for a crucial period?" Samuel nodded slowly, warming to the concept. Alpha power is fundamentally different from ordinary werewolf energy, more primal, more concentrated, if channeled properly into a Shadowhunter vessel. "It could amplify her abilities exponentially," Victoria finished, excitement entering her normally composed features. "Temporarily, of course, and with considerable risk to both of them." "What kind of risk?" Marcus demanded, his protective instincts immediately alert. Victoria exchanged glances with Samuel before answering carefully. "Reversing an established life force bond is dangerous under the best circumstances. The backlash could potentially harm both participants, and channeling raw alpha power into a human vessel, even one with Shadowhunter blood, might overwhelm Alara's system." "It could kill her," Marcus translated bluntly. "Unacceptable." "It could save her," Alara countered quietly. "And the pack. If Thaddeus succeeds in making me a vessel for the Ancient One, my fate will be far worse than death." She met Marcus's golden eyes steadily. "You know this to be true." A tense silence fell between them, their newly formed bond humming with conflicting emotions, his fierce protectiveness warring with her determined resolve, his alpha instinct to shield his mate clashing with her willingness to risk herself for a greater purpose. Catherine cleared her throat softly, breaking the charged moment. "There is one additional factor to consider," she said, her tone deliberately neutral. "The Silver Fang archive suggests that a properly balanced Alpha-Luna bond functions as a form of protection against external spiritual influences. If we could stabilize your bond before confronting Thaddeus, it might create a natural barrier against the Ancient One's possession attempts." "Stabilize how exactly?" Marcus asked, his attention shifting reluctantly from Alara to Catherine. The Silver Fang Alpha's expression remained carefully controlled. "The most effective method would be to complete the traditional mating bond, the bite." Alara's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where the ceremonial mark would traditionally be placed during a werewolf mating. Due to her wolfless state and Marcus's weakened condition during their wedding, this aspect of the bonding ritual had been replaced with the blood ritual that had created their current imbalanced connection. "Would that even work with a wolfless mate?" Samuel asked, voicing the question that hung in the air. "The blood bond already formed, against all expectations," Victoria pointed out. "A traditional marking might strengthen and stabilize that connection rather than replacing it." "It would need to be a true claiming," Catherine added, her clinical tone belied by a slight tension around her eyes as she glanced between Marcus and Alara. "Not merely ceremonial. The bond must be—" she hesitated fractionally— "complete in all aspects." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable to all present. Alara felt heat rise to her cheeks, despite her exhaustion, while Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, though the intensity of his gaze as it rested briefly on her betrayed deeper emotions. "This is a decision that belongs to Marcus and Alara alone," Samuel said firmly, recognizing the sensitivity of the matter. and one that need not be made this instant. First, let's focus on the more immediate problem of keeping Alara strong enough to continue developing her abilities while we formulate our strategy. Victoria nodded in agreement. The Silver Fang texts on balancing life force should arrive by nightfall. Until then, I can continue working with Alara on the fundamentals of shadow manipulation, focusing on techniques that require less energy. And I'll coordinate with my warriors to establish secure communications and emergency extraction routes if needed, Catherine added, all business once more. We have 8 Silver Fang wolves positioned throughout the castle grounds, with another dozen camped in the eastern forests, ready to move on my signal. I'll continue researching the Ancient One and any documented weaknesses, Samuel volunteered. The historical accounts may contain strategies from previous confrontations that we can adapt. Marcus surveyed the group with something approaching hope for the first time since learning of Thaddeus's betrayal. We have less than 2 days until the full moon. Every moment counts. He turned to Alara, his expression softening slightly. Rest when you can, when you've out. Your strength will be crucial when the time comes. As the group dispersed to their various tasks, Alara found herself alone with Marcus for the first time since his return to the castle. The bond between them hummed with unspoken emotions and unanswered questions. She could feel his conflict, the protective instinct to keep her safe, warring with the tactical necessity of using her abilities, the growing personal attachment battling with his sense of duty to the pack. "You're troubled," she observed quietly, moving to stand beside him at the map table. Marcus didn't look up from the strategic markers he was adjusting, but his voice carried a weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. "I brought you into this pack as a political necessity. Now you face death or worse because of that decision." "You didn't decide to poison yourself with the shadow plague," Alara reminded him gently. "Nor did you orchestrate our marriage knowing what Thaddeus intended. We were both pawns in a game whose rules we didn't understand." "And now?" he asked, finally turning to face her, his golden eyes searching hers. "What are we now, Alara Blackthorn?" The question carried layers of meaning that resonated through their bond. What indeed? No longer merely political allies, not quite true mates in the werewolf tradition. Something unplanned yet increasingly undeniable existed between them. A connection that had begun as magical necessity, but was evolving into something neither had anticipated. "Survivors," she answered softly. "Partners against a common enemy. And perhaps—" She hesitated, summoning courage from some deep reserve. "Perhaps something more, given time and choice, rather than ritual and obligation." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a softening, a vulnerability rarely displayed by the Alpha King. His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the map table, the simple contact sending warmth cascading through their bond. "When this is over," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard, "if we survive what's coming, I would court you properly, not as a political arrangement or magical necessity, but as a man courts a woman he has come to admire and respect." The formal declaration, so at odds with the forced circumstances of their union, touched Alara deeply. "I would welcome that," she replied, her violet eyes meeting his golden ones with newfound confidence. "Though first, we must ensure there is an after to look forward to." Marcus nodded, the vulnerability receding as the Alpha King reasserted himself. "Rest now," he said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Tomorrow we begin preparations in earnest. Whatever Thaddeus has planned for the full moon, we will be ready." As Alara returned to her alcove to rest, Catherine approached Marcus, her expression carefully neutral. "You care for her," she observed quietly. "More than I expected." "She is my mate," Marcus replied simply. "Unexpected, perhaps, but undeniable now." Catherine studied him for a long moment, ice-blue eyes searching for something in his face. The Marcus Blackthorn I knew never accepted fate passively. He fought for what he wanted, claimed what he believed was his by right. Perhaps this Marcus Blackthorn has learned that some battles are won through acceptance rather than conquest, he countered, a hint of the old spark returning to his eyes. and that some claims are stronger when freely given rather than taken by force. A smile touched Catherine's lips, genuine if tinged with something like regret. She's changing you already. Good. You are becoming too set in your ways, old wolf. Says the she-wolf who hasn't changed her battle strategy in 15 years, Marcus retorted, the familiar banter easing the tension between them. Why change what works? Catherine shrugged, before her expression grew serious once more. We face long odds, Marcus. Even with the Silverfang Alliance, even with Alara's developing abilities. The Ancient One has been preparing this move for years, corrupting your council from within, weakening your position gradually. This confrontation comes at their chosen time, not ours. Then we change the timing, Marcus stated simply. Force their hand before they're fully prepared. Catherine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. How? By announcing my return to the pack, Marcus said, determination hardening his features. Not at the full moon, but tomorrow at dawn. A formal address to the entire Silver Crescent pack, with you standing beside me as ally and witness. We force Thaddeus to either acknowledge my authority or challenge it openly, before the ritual he has planned. A bold move, Catherine acknowledged, tactical assessment evident in her tone. But it places you squarely in his sights, with Alara still weakened and your bond unstable. Better to choose the field of battle than wait for an ambush, Marcus countered. Tomorrow we take control of this conflict. We set the terms of engagement, and we begin the fight that will determine not just our fates, but the future of all packs in the Northern Territories. As night fell over Castle Blackthorn, preparations continued in the ancient library. Maps were studied, strategies debated, ancient texts consulted for forgotten knowledge that might turn the tide against an enemy older than the packs themselves. Throughout the castle above, shadows lengthened and deepened as darkness claimed the ancient fortress, bringing with it whispers of what awaited when the full moon rose over the Northern Territories. In the council tower, Thaddeus Ironwood stood at his window, gazing at the same moon that would soon reach its fullness. Unlike the strategic discussions taking place in the hidden library below, he stood alone, in silence. No maps spread before him, no allies offering counsel. Only shadows gathered at his feet, twisting and coiling like living things, occasionally reaching tendrils upward to caress his aged hands with loving darkness. Soon, he whispered to the empty air, though perhaps not entirely empty. The vessel is prepared. Weakened, but not broken. The Alpha returns to strength, making the bond between them all the more powerful to harness. All unfolds as it must. From the deepest shadows came not a sound but a sensation, approval, anticipation, hunger, that made the elderly wolf smile with terrible serenity. The Ancient One was pleased with its servant. The waiting was nearly over. Soon, very soon, darkness would claim what had been promised, a vessel of combined blood, a doorway between worlds, and through it, dominion over all werewolf kind. The game approached its final moves. The pieces were in position, and as midnight passed over Castle Blackthorn, both sides prepared for a confrontation centuries in the making, with the fate of packs, territories, and perhaps the world itself hanging in the balance. Dawn broke over Castle Blackthorn with unnatural brilliance, as if the sun itself sensed the momentous events unfolding within the ancient fortress. In the castle's great hall, pack members gathered in growing numbers, summoned by a formal declaration that had spread through the ranks like wildfire. The Alpha King would address his people. The massive space, designed to accommodate the entire Silver Crescent pack during times of significance, filled rapidly with warriors, elders, and ordinary pack members. Tension hung thick in the air, mingling with confusion and anticipation. For months they had witnessed their king's slow decline, had adjusted to the council's increasing authority, had accepted the inevitable transition of power that seemed to be unfolding. Now, rumors of Marcus Blackthorn's miraculous recovery and his sudden return from the Northern Territories had thrown everything into question. On the dais, where the obsidian throne stood, council members gathered in a tight cluster around Thaddeus Ironwood. The elderly wolf's composure remained intact, but those closest to him could detect the subtle signs of his agitation, the slightly too tight grip on his ceremonial staff, the occasional twitch beneath his left eye, the way shadows seemed to gather at his feet, despite the bright morning light flooding through the high windows. "This is most irregular," he murmured to his inner circle. The king was expected to remain at the northern border for at least another day, and this sudden announcement, without consulting the council first— "Perhaps his recovery has emboldened him," suggested one of his closest allies, a thin-faced wolf with calculating eyes. "The Shadow Plague's retreat may have restored not just his strength, but his assertiveness." Thaddeus's mouth tightened imperceptibly. "Perhaps, or perhaps other influences have reached him. The Silver Fang delegation's timing remains suspicious." Before further speculation could occur, a hush fell over the gathered pack as the massive doors at the back of the hall swung open. Marcus Blackthorne entered with the measured stride of a warrior king in his prime, his powerful frame draped in the formal regalia of the Silver Crescent Alpha, midnight blue and silver, with the ancient Blackthorne crest emblazoned across his chest. The change in him was immediately apparent to all who had witnessed his decline. Gone was the gaunt pallor, the slight stoop, the dullness in his golden eyes. The Alpha who strode down the central aisle radiated vitality and authority that had not been seen in Castle Blackthorne for many months. But it was not Marcus alone who caused the collective intake of breath throughout the hall. At his side walked Alara, her slender form adorned in a gown that matched his regalia in color and style, marking her unmistakably as his queen. Though still pale, she moved with surprising grace, her violet eyes alert and aware as they swept across the gathered pack. And most shocking of all, to those with eyes to see such things, was the faint aura that seemed to surround her, not the traditional glow of a wolf-blessed Luna, but something different, something ancient that made the shadows in the hall shift and retreat as she passed. Behind the royal pair came Catherine Silverbane, her silver-blonde braid gleaming in the morning light, her warriors flanking her in a clear display of alliance. Samuel Oakenshield followed, his weathered face impassive but his hand resting casually on the hilt of his cavalry saber, a gesture not lost on the more observant pack members. And at the rear, Victoria Ravenwing walked with perfect composure. Her dark eyes revealing nothing of her true allegiance, the procession reached the dais, where Marcus ascended alone to stand before the obsidian throne. He did not sit, but rather face the assembled pack from his full height, his golden gaze sweeping across the hall until it came to rest on Thaddeus and the gathered council members. "My people," Marcus began, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the great hall. "I stand before you restored in strength and purpose, returned to claim my rightful place as your alpha and protector." A murmur ran through the crowd, relief from many, uncertainty from some, and from the council members, barely concealed tension. "For too long, the Shadow Plague has weakened me, diminished my ability to serve as the alpha you deserve," Marcus continued. "Many believed my decline inevitable, my death merely a matter of time. Some may have even begun to prepare for a new era under different leadership." His gaze fixed pointedly on Thaddeus, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the directness of the challenge. "But fate, it seems, had other plans. Through my union with Luna Ilara Blackthorne, the Shadow Plague's hold has been broken. My wolf is awake, my strength returns, and with it, my determination to protect the Silver Crescent Pack from all threats, both those that prowl our borders and those that may lurk within our very walls." The implied accusation hung in the air, causing another ripple of murmurs through the gathered pack. Thaddeus stepped forward, his elderly frame somehow projecting both respect and authority simultaneously. "The council rejoices in your Majesty's recovery," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of his decades of service. "Indeed, it was the council who arranged your union with the Callister girl, anticipating the unique properties of her bloodline might aid your condition." A clever move, Marcus noted inwardly. Thaddeus was attempting to claim credit for the very outcome he had sought to prevent. "Indeed," Marcus acknowledged with dangerous softness. "The council's foresight in this matter raises interesting questions. Questions about exactly what properties of Alara's bloodline were known, and what effects were anticipated. Thaddeus's smile didn't waver, though something flickered in the depths of his eyes. We consulted ancient texts, histories of the Callister line. While certain outcomes were theorized, the actual results have exceeded all expectations, a fortunate development for the pack. Fortunate, Marcus repeated, the single word carrying layers of meaning. As Alpha King of the Silver Crescent Pack, I find myself curious about other decisions made during my period of illness. The deployment of guards to the Northern Territories based on reports of rogue wolves. The restricted access to certain areas of the castle, including the ancient library. The tonics prescribed to my mate during my absence. With each point, Thaddeus's composure slipped fractionally, though only those who knew him well would notice the subtle signs of strain. The shadows at his feet grew deeper, more agitated, a detail that did not escape Alara's newly sensitized perception. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice carrying to him through their strengthening bond rather than her lips. The shadows around him are responding to his emotions. They're feeding on them. Marcus gave no outward indication he had heard her, but through their connection, she felt his acknowledgement and heightened awareness. The confrontation had begun, though most of those present remained unaware of its true nature or stakes. "Administrative decisions," Thaddeus responded smoothly, "made to maintain order during an uncertain period. The Council acts always in the best interest of the pack." "The best interest of the pack," Marcus echoed, his voice hardening. "Is it in the best interest of the pack to poison their alpha with the shadow plague? To arrange a marriage intended not to heal, but to hasten his decline? To serve an entity that existed before werewolves walked the earth?" Shocked gasps and confused muttering erupted throughout the hall. Thaddeus's mask of benevolent elder slipped further, his knuckles whitening around his ceremonial staff. "These are serious accusations, Your Majesty," he said, his tone sharpening. "Made without evidence, they could be construed as the desperate claims of an alpha whose mind has been affected by prolonged illness." Catherine Silverbane stepped forward then, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Thaddeus with predatory focus. "The Silver Fang Pack stands witness to these claims, Elder Ironwood. Our archives contain records of previous attempts by the Ancient One to infiltrate pack leadership. The patterns are unmistakable to those with eyes to see." Thaddeus's gaze shifted to Catherine, something dangerous flaring behind his elderly facade. "The Silver Fangs have always been eager to interfere in Silver Crescent affairs. Perhaps Alpha Silverbane sees an opportunity in this period of transition." "I see a pack elder corrupted by forces beyond his control," Catherine countered. "Forces that threaten not just the Silver Crescent Pack, but all werewolf kind. Forces that have used you, Thaddeus Ironwood, as their entry point into our world." The tension in the Great Hall had reached a breaking point. Pack members looked between their Alpha King and the respected elder with growing confusion and alarm. Some of the younger wolves had begun to shift closer to Marcus, their instinctive loyalty to their alpha overriding the political complexities at play. Others, particularly those who had worked closely with the council, moved subtly to position themselves near Thaddeus. Victoria Ravenwing, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, now stepped forward, her movement drawing all eyes. As a respected council member, her next words would influence many of the undecided pack members. "For 12 years I have served on this council," she began, her clear voice commanding attention. "I have observed, I have advised, and I have remained silent when perhaps I should have spoken." She turned to face the assembled pack, rather than either Marcus or Thaddeus. "What began as ambition in Elder Ironwood has become corruption of the most dangerous kind. I have witnessed the gradual infiltration of something ancient and malevolent, something that seeks not to serve the pack, but to subjugate it." Thaddeus's composure cracked visibly at this betrayal. "Victoria," he hissed, "you forget yourself. The council speaks with one voice." "Not today," she replied firmly. "Today, I speak with my own voice, and I declare my allegiance to the true alpha of the Silver Crescent Pack, to Marcus Blackthorn and his Luna." The declaration sent shock waves through the assembled pack. Victoria had been seen as Thaddeus's closest ally on the council for years. Her defection represented a seismic shift in the power dynamics at play. Marcus seized the moment, his alpha authority resonating through his next words. The full moon rises tonight. With it comes not just the traditional ceremonies of our kind, but a ritual of darker purpose, one that Elder Ironwood has prepared in secret, intending to use my mate as a vessel for the entity he serves. He gestured to Alara, who stepped forward to stand beside him. Though she swayed slightly with lingering weakness, her violet eyes were clear and determined. "I was brought to this pack as a political bride," she said, her voice softer than Marcus's, but carrying nonetheless. A wolfless omega from a disgraced line, intended as nothing more than a symbol of a dying reign. What Elder Ironwood did not anticipate was that the bloodline he sought to exploit carried power of its own. At her words, the shadows in the great hall seemed to respond, stretching and shifting in ways that defied natural light. Several pack members stepped back in alarm, while others leaned forward in fascination. "Show them," Marcus murmured to her, his hand finding hers in a gesture of support that was both personal and symbolic. Alara closed her eyes briefly, centering herself as Victoria had taught her. When she opened them again, they had transformed, no longer violet, but pools of liquid darkness flecked with points of light like distant stars. She raised her free hand, and the shadows throughout the hall responded, gathering and swirling before coalescing into visible tendrils that extended from Thaddeus and several council members, connecting them to a larger mass of darkness that pulsed behind them like a malevolent heart. "This is the true face of the influence that has corrupted your council," Alara declared, her voice taking on a resonant quality that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the spirit. Not ambition alone, not mere political maneuvering, but possession by an entity that existed before the first wolf shifted beneath the moon, an entity that would use werewolf kind as vessels and servants for its return to the world of flesh and blood. The visible manifestation of corruption shocked the assembled pack more than any words could have. Warriors who had stood uncertain now moved decisively to Marcus's side. Pack members who had respected the council's authority backed away from the dark tendrils in horror. Only those already deeply corrupted remained loyal to Thaddeus, their own shadows merging with the darkness that surrounded him. Thaddeus himself seemed to grow taller, his elderly frame straightening as something else looked out through his eyes, something ancient and cold and hungry. "Impressive, little queen," he said, but the voice was no longer entirely his own. It carried harmonics that grated against the senses, a sound that belonged to no human or werewolf throat. "The shadow hunter blood runs stronger in you than we anticipated. A miscalculation, but not a fatal one." With shocking speed for one his age, Thaddeus raised his staff and struck it against the stone floor. A concussive wave of dark energy exploded outward, knocking many pack members off their feet and creating momentary chaos in the great hall. When Marcus regained his footing, he saw that Thaddeus and his corrupted council members had vanished, leaving behind only swirling shadows that gradually dissipated like smoke. "They've retreated to prepare the ritual," Victoria said urgently, helping Alara remain upright after the expenditure of energy. "The demonstration forced their hand, but it won't stop their plans." Samuel pushed through the disoriented pack members to join them on the dais. "The northeastern tower," he reported grimly. "My sources confirm they've been preparing a ritual chamber there for weeks. Ancient symbols, sacrificial altar, the full, dark pageantry." "Then we pursue," Marcus declared, his wolf surging beneath his skin, eager for the confrontation. "Catherine, secure the castle with your warriors. Any corrupted pack members who resist are to be contained, not killed if possible. Victoria, remain with those untainted to organize our forces and explain what they've witnessed." "And Alara?" Victoria asked, her concern evident as she supported the younger woman, who had grown paler after her display of power. Marcus's expression softened briefly as he looked at his mate. "She comes with me. The ritual requires her presence. Better she remain under my protection than risk Thaddeus's servants attempting to capture her." "I can fight," Alara insisted, though her voice betrayed her weakened state. "The shadows respond to me now. I can help." Your greatest help will be surviving, Samuel told her bluntly. The Ancient One cannot complete its manifestation without a proper vessel. You remain the key to this conflict, whether we wish it or not. Marcus turned to address the loyal pack members who had rallied to him. The Silver Crescent pack faces its greatest threat not from outside our borders, but from within. Tonight, we fight not just for our territory or our hierarchy, but for our very souls. Those who stand with me prepare for battle. Those who cannot fight secure the vulnerable members of our pack in the lower chambers. As the hall erupted into purposeful activity, Marcus led his core allies toward the northeastern tower, where centuries of Blackthorn rule would face its greatest challenge, not from rival packs or human hunters, but from a darkness older than their kind itself. The northeastern tower of Castle Blackthorn had always stood slightly apart from the rest of the fortress, its architecture more severe, its purpose more mysterious. Originally built as an observatory for tracking celestial movements, it had evolved over centuries into a repository for knowledge and artifacts deemed too dangerous or controversial for the main library. Few pack members ventured there under normal circumstances, finding the tower's atmosphere oppressive and unwelcoming. Now, as Marcus, Alara, Samuel, and a small contingent of elite warriors approached its heavy, iron-bound doors, that atmosphere had intensified to palpable malevolence. Shadows clung to the stone walls like living things, writhing and pulsing with unnatural vitality. The air itself felt thick, resistant, as if the very space objected to their presence. The corruption has spread quickly, Samuel observed, his weathered hand tightening on his cavalry saber. The Ancient One gathers its strength for the ritual. Alara, still weakened but determined, focused her newfound senses on the darkness surrounding them. It's not just gathering strength, she said softly. It's feeding on fear, on ambition, on the negative emotions of those it has corrupted. The shadows aren't just manifestations, they're conduits. Marcus nodded grimly. Then we deprive it of its food source. We free those who can be freed from its influence and confront those who cannot. He turned to the warriors who had accompanied them. Secure the lower levels of the tower. Any pack members you encounter who show signs of corruption but are not fully converted, isolate them. Those beyond saving. He hesitated, the weight of the order heavy on him. Do what must be done. As the warriors dispersed to their tasks, Marcus turned to Alara, his golden eyes searching hers. You should remain here, with Samuel. The higher we climb, the stronger the Ancient One's influence will become. In your weakened state, in my weakened state, I'm still the only one who can see the shadows for what they truly are, Alara interrupted, a newfound steel in her voice. I'm coming with you, Marcus. This battle involves both of us, whether we chose it or not. Something flickered in the Alpha's eyes, pride mingled with concern, and perhaps something deeper that neither had yet named aloud. He nodded once, acknowledging both her determination and her right to make the choice. Stay close, he said simply. Our bond seems stronger within proximity. Perhaps it will offer some protection against what awaits us. Together, they began the ascent up the tower's winding staircase, Samuel following close behind, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for threats. The air grew colder as they climbed, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep through clothing and skin to touch the bones beneath. Shadows deepened along the walls, occasionally reaching out with tendril-like protrusions that Alara batted away with gestures that left brief flares of violet light in their wake. You're getting stronger, Marcus observed quietly as they paused on a landing to check a side passage. More confident with your abilities. Necessity proves a harsh but effective teacher, Alara replied with the ghost of a smile. Victoria's training gave me the foundation, but being surrounded by these manifestations provides practical application I couldn't have imagined. Samuel rejoined them after scouting ahead. The ritual chamber lies 2 more levels up. The sounds. He hesitated, his expression grim. Chanting has begun. We may have less time than we thought. They increased their pace, the urgency of their mission overriding caution. As they approached the final landing before the ritual chamber, a figure stepped out from the shadows to block their path. Victoria Ravenwing stood with unnatural stillness, her dark eyes fixed on them with an intensity that immediately triggered warnings in all three. "Victoria?" Alara ventured, her newly sensitized perception detecting something wrong in the council member's aura. "What are you doing here? You were meant to remain below with the untainted pack members." "Plans change," Victoria replied, her voice flat and emotionless. "As do allegiances." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself protectively before Alara. "She's corrupted," he growled, his claws extending in preparation for combat. "The Ancient One has claimed her." Victoria's lips curved in a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Not claimed, Alpha King, not yet. Merely influenced, a taste of what awaits all who serve." Her gaze shifted to Alara. "The vessel comes willingly to the altar. How considerate." "You betrayed the council only to serve a darker master," Samuel accused, moving to flank her, cutting off potential escape routes. "I serve what will inevitably triumph," Victoria responded. "The Ancient One offers power beyond your comprehension. I've glimpsed it through Thaddeus's connection. It is magnificent." "It is parasitic," Alara countered, stepping up beside Marcus despite his protective stance. "It feeds on your fear, your ambition, your darkest impulses. What you perceive as partnership is merely consumption." Something flickered briefly in Victoria's eyes, a moment of her true self struggling against the influence that had taken hold. It passed quickly, replaced by cold determination as she moved with werewolf speed, launching herself not at Marcus as expected, but at Alara. Marcus intercepted her with alpha reflexes, catching her mid-lunge and slamming her against the stone wall with enough force to crack the ancient masonry. Victoria snarled, her face contorting as her wolf emerged partially in response to the threat, teeth elongating into fangs, claws extending from elegant fingers. "Go!" Marcus commanded Alara and Samuel, maintaining his grip on Victoria despite her supernatural strength. "Reach the ritual chamber. Stop Thaddeus. I'll handle this and join you." Samuel hesitated only briefly before nodding, grabbing Alara's arm to pull her toward the final staircase. "He's right. We must reach the chamber before the ritual progresses too far." Alara resisted momentarily, her bond with Marcus flaring with concern as Victoria fought with unnatural power against his restraint. "Marcus, go," he repeated, his golden eyes meeting hers briefly. "Trust me, Luna. This is not where my story ends." Something in his voice, in the certainty that resonated through their bond, convinced her. With a last look at her embattled mate, Alara followed Samuel up the final flight of stairs toward the ritual chamber, where the chanting had grown louder, more rhythmic, building toward some terrible climax. The massive oak doors leading to the observatory ritual chamber stood partially open, releasing sickly green light and the scent of burning herbs that made Alara's head swim momentarily. Samuel steadied her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "Focus," he murmured. "Whatever you see in there, whatever you feel, remember who you are. Remember what you fight for." Alara nodded, centering herself as Victoria had taught her, drawing strength from the strange new power that had awakened within her bloodline. Together, they pushed the doors wider and stepped into a scene from ancient nightmare. The observatory had been transformed. The astronomical instruments that had once mapped the movements of stars and planets had been pushed to the walls, replaced by a central altar carved with symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. Around this altar, Thaddeus and 6 of his most corrupted council members stood in a precise formation, their robes midnight black, their faces partially obscured by deep hoods. They swayed in unison as they chanted in a language that seemed to slither rather than flow, each syllable leaving oily residue in the air. Most disturbing of all was what hung suspended above the altar, a writhing mass of living shadow, denser than the darkest night, occasionally forming shapes that suggested monstrous features before dissolving back into amorphous blackness. From this central mass, tendrils extended outward, connecting to each of the chanters, entering their bodies through eyes, mouths, and the very pores of their skin. They were not merely summoning the Ancient One, they were becoming it, allowing it to manifest through their collective form. "By all the old gods," Samuel whispered, momentarily transfixed by the horror before them. The chanting stuttered briefly as their presence was noticed, 7 corrupted faces turning toward the interruption with expressions ranging from annoyance to hungry anticipation. Thaddeus, standing at the head of the altar, lowered his hood to reveal features that had changed dramatically since the confrontation in the Great Hall. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, with dark veins visible beneath, pulsing with something that was not blood. His eyes had become entirely black, reflecting no light whatsoever. "The vessel arrives," he announced, his voice resonating unnaturally in the chamber, "and brings a witness to the rebirth. How fitting." "This ends now, Thaddeus," Samuel declared, drawing his cavalry saber in a fluid motion that spoke of decades of combat experience. "Whatever deal you made with this entity, whatever power it promised, it will consume you long before it fulfills its bargain." Thaddeus's laugh carried harmonics that set Alara's teeth on edge. "Consume me? I transcend through its essence. I become more than wolf, more than elder, more than the petty politics of pack hierarchy." He extended a hand toward Alara, the fingers elongated beyond human or werewolf proportion. "Come, vessel. Your place awaits. Your purpose manifests." "My purpose is my own," Alara replied, drawing on her awakening powers to create a shield of violet-tinged shadow around herself and Samuel. "As is my choice, and I choose to stand against whatever you have become." Anger distorted Thaddeus's already transformed features. "Choice is an illusion we permit the weak to comfort themselves with. The Ancient One has waited centuries for a vessel with the combined blood of wolf and shadow. It will not be denied by the defiance of a wolfless girl who barely understands what she is." At a gesture from Thaddeus, the other corrupted council members moved away from the altar, forming a loose semicircle that effectively blocked the exit. From each of them, shadow tendrils extended, probing at the barrier Alara had created, searching for weaknesses. Samuel moved into a defensive stance, his saber at ready. "Hold your shield," he murmured to Alara. "I'll handle any who break through." Alara nodded, focusing her concentration on maintaining the protective barrier while simultaneously reaching out with her shadow senses, searching for vulnerabilities in the Ancient One's manifestation. What she found surprised her. The entity, for all its apparent power, was not yet fully present. It existed in a state between worlds, anchored by the corrupted council members, but not yet possessing enough energy to fully manifest in physical form. "It's not complete," she whispered to Samuel. "The ritual isn't finished. That's why they need me, a vessel with the right bloodlines to serve as a permanent anchor." Samuel's weathered face showed grim satisfaction at this intelligence. "Then we hold until Marcus joins us. Together, we prevent the ritual's completion at any cost." As if summoned by his name, a commotion erupted at the chamber doors. Marcus Blackthorne burst through, his clothing torn, blood matting the fur at his shoulder, but his golden eyes blazing with undiminished alpha fire. Behind him lay the crumpled form of Victoria Ravenwing, whether dead or merely unconscious, Alara couldn't tell from this distance. "Marcus!" she cried, relief flooding through their bond. The Alpha King took in the scene with a tactical glance, immediately assessing threats and positioning himself to create a defensive triangle with Samuel and Alara. "The corruption spreads throughout the tower," he reported tersely. "Catherine's warriors are containing it, but we don't have much time before the full moon rises. Whatever we intend to do, it must happen now." Thaddeus observed this reunion with calculating black eyes. The Alpha returns to his mate. The circle completes. He gestured again, and the shadow tendrils redoubled their assault on Alara's barrier, which began to flicker under the sustained attack. "I can't hold this much longer," Alara warned, strain evident in her voice. "There are too many access points, too many corrupted vessels feeding its strength." Marcus's gaze locked with hers, determination and something deeper flowing through their bond. "Then we change the terms of engagement. We take the fight to them." Without further explanation, he launched himself directly at the nearest corrupted council member, his alpha strength and speed catching the transformed wolf off guard. His claws tore through the ceremonial robes, finding flesh beneath that leaked black ichor rather than blood. The corrupted wolf howled in pain, the sound more eldritch than lupine, breaking the chanting pattern that had continued throughout the confrontation. Samuel immediately followed Marcus's lead, engaging 2 more council members with the precision of a trained warrior, his cavalry saber slicing through shadow tendrils that attempted to entangle him. "The chanting," he shouted to Alara. "It sustains the manifestation. Disrupt it." Understanding flooded through Alara. Rather than maintaining a defensive posture, they needed to actively interfere with the ritual itself. Drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, she dropped the protective barrier and instead focused on the shadows themselves, not fighting them directly, but attempting to wrest control of them as Victoria had taught her in their brief training sessions. "Shadows respond to blood and will," Victoria had instructed. "They are neither good nor evil inherently, merely primordial forces that predate such concepts. Command them with certainty, and they will obey." Alara extended her hands toward the mass of writhing darkness above the altar, her violet eyes shifting to star-flecked black as she exerted her will against the Ancient One's control. "You feed on shadow, but shadow is my birthright," she declared, her voice carrying the same resonant quality it had in the Great Hall. "You corrupt what should flow freely. You consume what should exist in balance." To the amazement of all present, including Thaddeus, tendrils of shadow began to detach from the corrupted council members and flow toward Alara instead, responding to the call of her shadow hunter blood. The mass above the altar pulsed and contracted, as if in pain or confusion. "Impossible!" Thaddeus snarled, abandoning his position to lunge at Alara, his transformed body moving with unnatural speed. "The vessel does not command. The vessel receives." Marcus intercepted him with a roar that shook the very foundations of the tower, his wolf partially emerging in response to the threat to his mate. Man and beast merged in the Alpha King as he grappled with the corrupted elder, raw physical power against the unnatural strength granted by the Ancient One's influence. "She is not your vessel," Marcus growled through elongated fangs. "She is my mate, my Luna, and under my protection until my last breath." As the 2 leaders battled, Samuel continued his systematic disruption of the remaining council members, his experience and skill compensating for their supernatural advantages. One by one, the chanters fell silent, their connections to the central mass severed by blade or claw, until only Thaddeus's voice remained, now shouting in that slithering language rather than chanting, desperation evident in every syllable. Alara maintained her focus on the shadow mass, drawing more tendrils away from the corruption and toward herself, transforming their nature through her will and bloodline. The effort drained her already depleted reserves, causing her to stagger, her vision blurring momentarily. Through their bond, Marcus felt her faltering strength and redoubled his efforts against Thaddeus, driving the corrupted elder back toward the altar with relentless fury. "It's working!" Samuel called, dispatching the last of the lesser council members. "The manifestation weakens." Indeed, the mass above the altar had diminished significantly, its form less cohesive, its movements more erratic. But as the full moon's light began to filter through the observatory's massive windows, signaling the arrival of the critical astronomical alignment, the Ancient One made its final, desperate move. With shocking suddenness, all remaining shadow tendrils retracted from throughout the chamber, abandoning the fallen council members and even withdrawing from Thaddeus himself. They gathered into the central mass, which contracted to an impossibly dense singularity of darkness before shooting toward Alara with the speed and precision of a striking serpent. "No!" Marcus roared, releasing Thaddeus to lunge toward his mate, knowing even as he moved that he would be too late. The concentrated essence of the Ancient One struck Alara directly in the center of her chest, lifting her from her feet and suspending her in midair. Her back arched in silent agony, her eyes wide with shock as the entity forced its way into her body. The vessel it had been promised, the culmination of centuries of waiting and planning. Thaddeus, abandoned by his master in its final gambit, collapsed to his knees, blood now running from his eyes and nose as his body, no longer supported by the Ancient One's power, began to fail. "Yes," he whispered, watching Alara's suspended form with terrible reverence. "The joining completes. The Ancient One returns." Marcus reached for Alara, only to be thrown back by a pulse of energy that emanated from her body. He hit the wall hard enough to crack stone, but was on his feet again instantly, driven by desperate fear for his mate. "Alara!" he called, reaching for their bond and finding it suddenly, terrifyingly silent. Samuel moved to his side, blood streaming from a wound at his temple, but his eyes clear and focused. "The possession has begun," he said grimly. "If we cannot expel it quickly, we will lose her forever." "There must be a way," Marcus insisted, refusing to accept defeat even as Alara's body convulsed in midair, darkness swirling beneath her skin like living tattoos. "The bond, there must be some way to use our connection." "The marking," Samuel suggested urgently. "The traditional completion of the mating bond might create a channel strong enough to reach her, to help her fight the possession from within." Marcus looked at his old friend with new hope. "Even now? Even with the Ancient One already inside her?" "It's a desperate gamble," Samuel acknowledged. "But what alternatives remain?" None, Marcus realized. They had disrupted the ritual, but failed to prevent the final possession attempt. Now Alara fought alone against an entity older than werewolf kind, with only her newfound abilities and untested strength to sustain her. With renewed determination, Marcus approached his suspended mate, weathering the pulses of dark energy that tried to repel him. "Alara!" he called, reaching not just with his voice, but through their bond, pouring his strength, his will, his love into the connection between them. "Fight it. Remember who you are. Remember what you fight for." For a moment, there was no response. Then, almost imperceptibly, Alara's fingers twitched, a movement so slight it would have been missed by any observer less attuned to her. Through the nearly silenced bond, Marcus felt the faintest response. Not words, not even coherent emotion, but simple awareness. She was still there, still fighting, though losing ground with every passing second. It was enough. Marcus gathered his strength and leaped, catching Alara's suspended form and pulling her down into his arms, despite the dark energy that crackled around them both. The contact sent agony through his system, as if every cell in his body were being torn apart and reassembled incorrectly. But he held firm, cradling her against his chest as he had on their wedding day, when their blood had first mingled and changed both their fates. "I claim you," he growled, his voice deepening with alpha command. "Not as a vessel, not as a political alliance, but as my true mate, my equal, my Luna." With those words, he bit down on the junction of her neck and shoulder, his elongated canines piercing her flesh in the traditional marking of a werewolf mating. Blood filled his mouth, her blood, still human despite her awakening powers, still pure despite the darkness trying to corrupt it from within. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Alara's body convulsed in his arms as two opposing forces collided within her. The Ancient One's possession attempt and the mating bond's completion, each fighting for dominance over her physical form and spiritual essence. Shadow and light battled beneath her skin, creating patterns like lightning strikes across her exposed flesh. Her eyes flew open, but instead of star-flecked darkness or human violet, they glowed with a silver-gold luminescence that matched the full moonlight now streaming through the observatory windows. "Marcus!" she gasped, her voice layered with harmonics both beautiful and terrible. "I can't. It's too strong, too ancient." "You are stronger," he insisted, holding her gaze, pouring his alpha essence into the bond between them. You are Shadow Hunter and Luna, darkness and light in perfect balance. It can only consume what is hollow, and you are filled with purpose, with power, with connection. Through their strengthened bond, Marcus felt the battle raging within her, the Ancient One's cold, hungry presence seeking complete domination, and Alara's fierce, determined spirit refusing to surrender. But it wasn't enough. Despite her extraordinary resilience, the entity was simply too powerful, too practiced at corruption and consumption. She was losing ground with every heartbeat. In that moment of terrible clarity, Marcus made his decision. "Take what you need," he told her, pressing his forehead against hers, their blood still mingling where his mark claimed her neck. "Take my strength, my wolf, whatever you require to defeat it." "No," she protested weakly, understanding what he offered. "Your wolf is your essence, your power as alpha." "You are my essence now," he responded simply, "my priority, my choice." Through the completed mating bond, Marcus opened himself fully, creating a conduit through which Alara could draw not just his physical strength, but the very spiritual essence of his wolf, the accumulated power of generations of alpha blackthorns condensed and refined through his bloodline. It was a gift no alpha had ever willingly given, the source of their dominance and authority within pack hierarchy. As the power flowed from Marcus into Alara, his golden eyes dimmed slightly, his posture faltering as the wolf spirit that had defined him since his first shift partially transferred to his mate. But his grip remained firm, his resolve unshaken. Whatever the cost to himself, he would not lose her to the darkness. Within Alara, the influx of alpha essence created something unprecedented, a hybrid energy, neither fully shadow hunter nor fully werewolf, but a perfect synthesis of both lineages. The darkness of her shadow hunter heritage merged with the primal power of Marcus's wolf, creating a luminous twilight force that surged against the Ancient One's cold presence. "You are balance," she heard Marcus whisper against her ear as her consciousness expanded to encompass this new power. Neither shadow nor light alone, but the space between, the twilight where both exist in harmony. Understanding flooded through her. The Ancient One existed as pure shadow, unbalanced, hungry for dominion. Its weakness lay not in direct opposition, but in equilibrium, the balanced state it could never achieve or comprehend. With newfound clarity, Alara stopped fighting against the darkness within her and instead embraced it, accepting it as part of the whole rather than an invading enemy. "I see you," she told the Ancient One, not with fear or defiance, but with perfect comprehension. "I know what you are, what you seek, what you fear, and I deny you nothing while offering you everything." Confusion rippled through the entity's presence, an emotional response it had not experienced in millennia of existence. It had expected resistance, combat, the usual desperate struggle of a vessel fighting possession. This acceptance, this integration, was unprecedented and deeply disturbing to its fundamental nature. In that moment of confusion, Alara struck, not with rejection, but with transformation. Using the combined power of Shadow Hunter blood and Alpha Wolf essence, she began to alter the very nature of the darkness within her, weaving it into the balanced twilight energy that now defined her existence. The Ancient One fought this transformation with desperate intensity, recognizing too late the true threat to its separate identity. "No vessel!" it howled through Alara's mind, using concepts rather than words. "No prison. Free. Ancient. Eternal." "Not a prison," she corrected, her mental voice calm despite the agony of the transformation process. "A partnership. Balance. Evolution. The only path forward for a being of pure shadow in a world of light." The struggle reached its climax as the full moon achieved perfect alignment above the observatory. Moonlight poured through the windows with preternatural intensity, bathing Alara and Marcus in silver radiance that seemed to penetrate flesh and bone to touch the spiritual battle within. For one endless moment, the outcome hung in perfect balance, corruption or transformation, dominion or synthesis. Then, With a sound like the shattering of ancient ice, the separate identity of the Ancient One collapsed under the pressure of Alara's balanced power. Its essence didn't vanish but transformed, integrated into the twilight energy that now flowed through her veins, neither destroyed nor victorious, but fundamentally changed. Alara gasped as the battle concluded, her body abruptly released from the suspension that had held her. She collapsed against Marcus, who caught her despite his own weakened state, cradling her as if she were the most precious thing in existence. "Is it?" Samuel approached cautiously, his saber still ready, his expression a mixture of hope and wariness. "Gone," Alara confirmed, her voice hoarse from exertion. "Not destroyed, but transformed. Part of me now, its power redirected, its nature balanced." Marcus studied her face, noting the changes that the spiritual battle had wrought. Her violet eyes now held flecks of gold, reminiscent of his own alpha gaze. Her skin seemed to glow faintly from within, as if illuminated by moonlight, regardless of actual lighting conditions. And most tellingly, where the shadow tendrils had entered her flesh, delicate patterns like silver frost remained, a permanent reminder of the transformation she had undergone. "And you?" he asked softly, his concern evident in every line of his face. "Are you still Alara?" She smiled then, a genuine expression that reached her transformed eyes. "I am Alara Blackthorn," she confirmed, "Luna of the Silver Crescent Pack, mate to the Alpha King. But I am also something new, neither fully human, nor werewolf, nor shadow hunter, but a balance of all three." Marcus's relief was palpable, flowing through their strengthened bond like warm sunlight after winter. "And the cost to yourself?" she asked, her hand reaching up to touch his face with gentle concern. "I felt what you sacrificed for me." The Alpha King considered the question, taking stock of the changes within himself. His wolf remained present, but diminished, its overwhelming dominance tempered into something more measured. He could still feel the alpha power that had defined him for decades, but it now shared space with other aspects of his nature that had been overshadowed by his wolf's primacy. "Balance," he said finally. "Like you, I am changed, but not diminished. My wolf shared its essence with you willingly, and in return, I gained perspective." A slight smile touched his lips. "Perhaps I needed some tempering after all these years of absolute alpha authority." Samuel cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the immediate situation. "Thaddeus," he reminded them, gesturing toward the altar where the elderly wolf had collapsed. Together, they approached the fallen council leader. Thaddeus Ironwood lay crumpled beside the altar, his transformed features gradually returning to their natural state as the Ancient One's influence faded. Blood leaked from his eyes, nose, and ears, the physical price of hosting an entity his body was never designed to contain. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his pulse visibly fluttering in the vein at his throat. Marcus knelt beside the dying elder, no triumph in his expression, only solemn acknowledgement of a fallen adversary. "Why, Thaddeus?" he asked quietly. "After decades of loyal service to the pack, why turn to such darkness?" Thaddeus's eyes flickered open, now their normal pale blue rather than bottomless black. Recognition dawned in them as he focused on Marcus's face. "Alpha," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I sought power, immortality. It promised everything, and delivered nothing but corruption and death," Marcus observed without rancor. A trembling hand reached up, grasping Marcus's wrist with surprising strength for one so near death. The others, on the council, not all were willing. Some it took by force, some it deceived. Marcus nodded, understanding the complex layers of culpability involved. "Justice will account for degrees of corruption," he promised. "Those who can be redeemed will have that chance." Relief flickered briefly in the dying wolf's eyes. "The Ancient One," he managed, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Is it truly gone?" Alara stepped forward, allowing Thaddeus to see the transformation she had undergone. Transformed, she corrected gently. As all things must be when their time is past, neither light nor shadow alone can persist unchanging. Balance is the only sustainable path. Something like understanding passed across Thaddeus's features. The vessel became the transformer, he murmured, a hint of wonder in his fading voice. Perhaps it got what it truly needed, rather than what it thought it wanted. With those final, surprisingly insightful words, Thaddeus Ironwood, elder of the Silver Crescent Pack, servant of the Ancient One, catalyst for transformation, exhaled his last breath and went still, his eyes fixed on some distant vision beyond mortal perception. Marcus reached out and gently closed the elder's eyes. "May you find the balance in death that eluded you in life," he said formally, completing the traditional words spoken over fallen pack members, regardless of their final status. As they stood in the observatory, now silent save for the retreating sounds of conflict from the lower levels of the tower, moonlight continued to pour through the windows, illuminating the three figures beside the altar. Marcus Blackthorn, the Alpha King whose willingness to sacrifice had transformed his own nature. Alara Blackthorn, the Luna who had balanced opposing forces within herself to create something entirely new, and Samuel Oakenshield, the loyal warrior who had stood witness to the end of one era and the beginning of another. "It's over," Samuel said quietly, sheathing his cavalry saber with a sense of finality. "The Ancient One is contained. Thaddeus is gone. The corrupted council members will need judgment and healing, but the immediate threat has passed." "Not over," Marcus corrected, his arm encircling Alara's waist as she leaned against him, both supporting the other in their mutual exhaustion. "Transformed, like everything else this night." And as the three made their way slowly down the tower steps to rejoin their allies and begin the long process of healing the Silver Crescent Pack, the full moon continued its silent journey across the night sky, witnessing as it had for countless millennia the eternal cycle of ending and beginning, darkness and light, balance eternally sought and occasionally, miraculously, achieved. 3 months later, Alara Blackthorn stood on the massive balcony outside the royal chambers of Castle Blackthorn, watching the sunset paint the northern mountains in hues of amber and gold. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and distant snow, invigorating rather than chilling to her transformed senses. Much had changed since the night of the full moon ritual. The Silver Crescent Pack had undergone a period of healing and restructuring, with corrupted members receiving various forms of justice depending on their level of willing participation. Some, like the inner circle who had supported Thaddeus knowingly, had been exiled from Pack territories. Others, whose involvement had been coerced or manipulated, underwent purification rituals developed jointly by Victoria, who had survived her encounter with Marcus, and Catherine's Silver Fang healers. The council itself had been reformed, with Samuel Oakenshield reluctantly accepting the position of head advisor, despite his preference for his solitary cabin in the woods. Victoria Ravenwing retained her seat, her loyalty during the final conflict earning her renewed respect among pack members. And most surprisingly to traditional werewolves, 2 non-wolf members had been appointed: Alara's father, Lord Edmund Callister, whose health had improved dramatically once freed from the subtle poisoning Thaddeus had arranged, and Elena Winterbloom, a young human scholar who specialized in ancient pack histories. The castle itself seemed lighter somehow, the oppressive atmosphere that had permeated its halls during Thaddeus's corruption replaced by renewed vitality. Pack members moved with greater purpose and optimism, their connection to their Alpha and Luna strengthened by the trials they had overcome together. Alara heard the soft sound of the balcony doors opening behind her and smiled, recognizing her mate's presence through their bond before he even stepped into view. Marcus moved to stand beside her, his powerful frame silhouetted against the sunset. The past months had changed him as well. His hair now bore more strands of silver, and fine lines had appeared at the corners of his eyes. The sacrifice of alpha essence had aged him slightly, making him appear more his true age rather than the timeless vitality werewolves typically maintained well into their later years. yet the change suited him, lending a distinguished wisdom to his already commanding presence. "The Northern Alphas have all confirmed their attendance at the Winter Summit," he informed her, his hand finding hers with familiar ease. "Including the Red Claw Pack, which is something of a diplomatic miracle." "Catherine's influence, no doubt," Elara observed with a smile. "Her reputation among the Northern Territories carries significant weight." "As does the new respect for the Silver Crescent Luna," Marcus added, his golden eyes reflecting pride as they regarded her. "Word of your transformation has spread throughout Pack territories. Many are curious to meet the woman who balanced shadow and light within herself." Elara laughed softly, the sound carrying a musical quality it hadn't possessed before her transformation. "They expect some mythical figure, no doubt. They'll be disappointed to find merely a woman who has learned to accept all aspects of herself rather than fearing those that seemed darkest." "There is nothing merely about you, Elara Blackthorn," Marcus countered, his tone warm with affection that still surprised her sometimes, coming from the once stern Alpha King. "You've brought balance not just to yourself, but to the Pack, to the territories, to me." She turned to face him fully, studying the face that had become so dear to her over the past months. Through their completed mating bond, she could feel the truth of his words. The tempering of his dominant alpha nature had not weakened him as a leader, but strengthened him, allowing wisdom and compassion to guide his strength rather than overshadowing it. "We brought balance to each other," she corrected gently. "The hollow bride and the dying king, each providing what the other lacked." Marcus smiled at the reference to their inauspicious beginning, drawing her closer against the cooling evening air. "Speaking of balance," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "Samuel believes he's found references to others like you in the ancient archives, historical figures who balanced multiple bloodlines, manifesting unique abilities." "Others who contained transformed ancient entities?" Elara asked, raising an eyebrow skeptically. "Not exactly," Marcus admitted with a slight laugh, "but individuals who served as bridges between different supernatural worlds, mediators, healers, occasionally warriors when necessary. He thinks your abilities may continue to evolve as you grow more comfortable with the balance within you." Elara considered this, absently tracing one of the silver patterns that now adorned her forearm, permanent marks of her transformation, beautiful in their delicate complexity. "I feel it sometimes," she confessed. "Moments when the shadows respond in new ways, when I sense things beyond normal perception. It no longer frightens me as it once did." "Because you know who you are," Marcus said simply. "Luna of the Silver Crescent Pack, my mate, a woman of extraordinary courage who faced darkness and transformed it rather than being consumed by it." She smiled at his declaration, leaning into his embrace as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky painted in deep twilight hues, neither full light nor complete darkness, but the perfect balance between the two, a fitting symbol for what they had become together. "The Pack prepares for the evening run," Marcus observed, nodding toward the forests below, where werewolves had begun to gather in anticipation of the night's activities. "Will you join us?" Though Elara could not shift forms as true werewolves did, her transformation had granted her enhanced speed and stamina that allowed her to run with the Pack during their moonlight excursions. It was one of many ways she had found to bridge the worlds she now inhabited. Not fully werewolf, but no longer merely human, connected to both realms without being limited to either. "Always," she replied, turning with him toward the chamber doors. "After all, what good is transformation if not shared with those who matter most?" As they made their way down to join the waiting Pack, the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight above Castle Blackthorn. Within its ancient walls, the Alpha King and his Luna prepared to lead their people into the night, their unique bond a testament to the power of balance, sacrifice, and unexpected love, forces stronger than ancient darkness, more enduring than shadow and light themselves.